She signed the divorce papers quietly, then a billionaire's jet landed for her. Preston Caldwell slid the divorce papers across the table without looking up from his phone. Not because he was busy, because she wasn't worth the 2 seconds it would take to meet her eyes. Zariah Monroe picked up the pen. Her hand did not shake. Across the table, his mistress, Celeste Vaughn, sat wearing a diamond bracelet that Zariah recognized. She had seen the invoice. She knew exactly which account paid for it. Charitable funds. Money meant for sick children, wrapped around the wrist of the woman her husband chose instead. Zariah signed. Preston finally looked up, expecting tears. He found nothing he recognized. And if you were sitting in that room, if that were your signature, your name, your decade of your life reduced to a 2-minute legal transaction, what would you do next? Stay with me. Subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end, because what happens in the next 2 hours will leave you breathless. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels, because Zariah Monroe's story is just getting started. The morning of the divorce, Chicago was the color of dirty ice. Zariah had been awake since 4. Not because of nerves. She had burned through nerves somewhere around month 7 of watching Preston reorganize their shared life around the comfort of another woman. She was awake because she had spent the last 3 hours reviewing a folder on her laptop that her attorney had compiled over 11 months of quiet, methodical work. Bank transfers. Wire confirmations. Expense reports filed under charitable operating costs that were, in fact, charges from a jewelry boutique in the Gold Coast, a private chef hired for weekend trips to Celeste's condo in River North, 2 round-trip first-class flights to Bali that Preston had told Zariah were investor conferences. She closed the laptop at 6:30 and took a shower. Let the water run until it went cold. Got dressed in a charcoal wool suit she had bought for herself 2 years ago, when she still bought things for herself. Did her makeup slowly, not out of vanity, but because the ritual steadied her hands. Preston had not slept in the same bedroom as Zariah in 4 months. He had not needed to announce it. One night he simply did not come upstairs. Then 2 nights. Then a week. Then Zariah noticed that his cologne, a heavy cedar and bergamot thing she used to find unbearably attractive, had stopped living in their bathroom. His suits were gone from their closet. A housekeeper named Patricia, who had worked for them for 6 years, and who would cry quietly in the kitchen when she thought no one could hear, had spent an entire Thursday packing Preston's belongings out of the master suite at his direction. Zariah found out because Patricia had left a handwritten note slipped under her door that night. Mrs. Caldwell, I'm sorry. I was told I had to. I'm so sorry. Zariah had folded the note and put it in the same folder where she kept everything else. Now sitting in the back seat of a car her attorney had arranged, watching the city slide past in the gray morning light, Zariah thought about what Preston expected to happen today. He expected her to cry in the conference room. He expected her lawyer to be outmatched by his team of 4. He expected her to fight over the lakeside mansion and the investment accounts and the vacation property in Scottsdale, because fighting over things would keep her occupied and emotional and manageable. He expected the divorce to cost him money and time and maybe some public embarrassment, and he had already calculated how much of each he was willing to absorb. What he did not expect was that Zariah had stopped fighting over things. She was fighting over something else entirely. The law office, where they'd agreed to finalize the settlement, was on the 31st floor of a building in the Loop. Zariah arrived 7 minutes early. Her attorney, a compact, precise woman named Dana Okafor, who had been practicing family law for 19 years, and who possessed the particular energy of someone who had seen every version of this story and still chose to show up angry on behalf of her clients, was already there with 2 associates and a banker's box of documents. "You doing okay?" Dana asked. "I'm fine," Zariah said, which was not entirely true and not entirely false. Preston arrived 11 minutes late. This was intentional. He had never once in 12 years of marriage been late to anything that mattered to him. Lateness was something he deployed as a message, a small, deniable cruelty that communicated who had value in the room and who was simply waiting. He came in with his lead attorney and 2 associates, and Celeste. Zariah had not expected Celeste. For a half second, just a half second, Something moved through Zariah's chest that she could not name. Not jealousy. Something rawer. The specific pain of watching someone she had shared a bed with, shared a life with, shared a vision of the future with, walk into a room with another woman and sit down at the table like this was all completely reasonable, like this was just business. Celeste was wearing a cream blazer and the diamond bracelet. The bracelet caught the overhead light as she arranged herself in her chair, and Zariah clocked it with the same flat, memorizing attention she had been applying to everything for the past 11 months. Preston settled into his seat and finally looked at Zariah. His expression was the one he saved for employees who had disappointed him, patient, slightly contemptuous, already finished with the conversation. "Let's get this done," he said. His attorney slid a revised settlement document across the table. Dana intercepted it before Zariah touched it and spent 4 minutes reading it without any visible reaction. Then she set it face down on the table. "We're not signing this version," Dana said. Preston's attorney, a silver-haired man named Garfield, who had done 3 decades of high-asset divorce work for wealthy Chicago men, smiled with practiced ease. "The revisions are minor. They exclude the charitable foundation from disclosure requirements," Dana said. "That's not minor. That's the ballpark." Preston leaned back. "The foundation is a separate legal entity. It has nothing to do with the dissolution of a personal marriage." "Your wife's name is on the founding documents," Dana said. "Her family inheritance ceded 40% of its initial capitalization. And the expense records we've been reviewing suggest the foundation has been used as something other than a charitable instrument." The silence lasted 4 seconds. Celeste shifted in her chair. Preston's face did not change, but something behind his eyes did. A small, quick recalibration, like a man suddenly realizing the room is shaped differently than he thought. "Sign your version," he said to Zariah quietly, like the lawyers weren't there. "We can handle foundation questions separately." Zariah looked at him. "We already are," she said. She picked up the pen her attorney had placed in front of her and signed the original settlement agreement, not Preston's revised version, while Dana simultaneously handed Garfield a 3-page letter notifying Preston's team that a forensic audit of the Caldwell Family Charitable Foundation had been formally engaged by an independent firm, with a preliminary findings report expected within 60 days. Garfield read the first paragraph. His practiced ease evaporated. Preston did not look at the letter. He kept looking at Zariah. "You're making a mistake." "I made mistakes," Zariah said. "Signing today isn't one of them." She stood, picked up her bag. Dana and her associates began gathering documents. Preston stood too. "Zariah, you used the foundation's operating account to buy her that bracelet," Zariah said. She did not raise her voice. She did not point. She just said it, quietly, into the air of the conference room, the way you state a fact that has already been proven. "I saw the transfer, I saw the invoice. I know exactly what it cost and which account it came from, and so does the audit firm." Celeste looked down at her own wrist. Preston said nothing. Zariah walked out. The elevator ride down was 31 floors, and she spent it staring at the numbers and breathing through her nose. In the lobby, Dana touched her arm. "That was clean," she said. "You did that well." "I didn't feel clean," Zariah admitted. "You don't have to feel it to do it right." They pushed through the revolving doors into the cold morning air, and then everything stopped. The street outside was not how Zariah had left it. There were 4 black vehicles, 2 SUVs, a sedan, and 1 vehicle she could not immediately classify, parked in a configuration that had quietly, efficiently blocked the loading zone in front of the building's entrance. Not aggressive, not theatrical, simply immovable. The drivers were standing outside their respective vehicles, not moving, not talking. One of them was talking into an earpiece. Dana stopped walking. Her 2 associates stopped walking. A courier coming out of the building behind them had to step around them. At the center of this arrangement stood a man. He was perhaps 35, with the kind of stillness that tends to make rooms, or in this case sidewalks, reorganize themselves around him. Black suit, no tie, the collar of his shirt open by 2 buttons. A tattoo rose above that collar, the edge of something intricate and dark that disappeared beneath the fabric. He was not particularly large. He was not doing anything threatening. He was standing with his hands loosely at his sides, watching Zariah walk out of the building with an expression that was almost, careful was the word she would have used later, an expression that was careful, controlled in a way that suggested enormous effort. His name was Seo Tae-jun. Zariah knew this. She had known him before he became the name that certain kinds of men spoke quietly and with a particular kind of respect that was indistinguishable from fear. Before the shipping empire and the hospitality holdings and the rumors about the organization that moved underneath all of it like current beneath still water. She had known him when they were young and Chicago was a different kind of city and the future had seemed wide enough for any number of possibilities. She hadn't seen him in 4 years. "You look tired," he said. "You're blocking traffic," she said. One side of his mouth moved, almost a smile. "Traffic can wait." Behind her, she heard the building's revolving doors. Preston and Garfield had followed them out. Preston took in the vehicles, the drivers, the man standing at the center of it all, and his face went through a series of rapid adjustments. Confusion, recognition, something she would describe as controlled alarm badly disguising itself as contempt. "Who the hell is this?" Preston said. Not to Zariah. To the air, to Garfield, to the general concept of the situation. Tae-jun did not look at Preston. He was still looking at Zariah. She let herself look back at him for a moment. He looked the same and entirely different. Older in the way that meant something. Not just years, but the weight of decisions. His jaw was set at the same angle she remembered. His hands were the same hands. "Zariah," Preston said, louder now, in the specific tone he used when he felt he was being excluded from something. "Do you know this person?" She turned around, looked at her ex-husband. She was already thinking of him that way. Ex, the word settling into place with the kind of finality that surprised her. Standing on the sidewalk in his $1,000 coat and his practiced authority, his attorney beside him and his mistress just behind, and the bracelet still catching light on Celeste's wrist. She thought about Patricia's note folded inside the folder. She thought about the 4 months of empty bedroom. She thought about the invoice she had found, the one that had started all of it. Not the jewelry invoice, something earlier, something smaller. An expense report line item that had seemed wrong and had led her to pull the thread and keep pulling until the whole sweater unraveled into something she couldn't ignore. She thought about what Preston had expected to happen today. "He's here for me," she said. Preston's mouth opened. Nothing useful came out. Tae-jun stepped forward and opened the rear door of the sedan behind him. Not with a gesture, not with words, just the door, held open, waiting for her to decide. And Zariah Monroe, who had just signed away 12 years of her life in a conference room on the 31st floor, who had not slept more than 5 hours in 3 days, whose hands had not fully warmed up since she got in the car that morning, who was still breathing through the hollow place in her chest where her marriage used to be, made a decision. She walked to the car. She got in. Tae-jun closed the door, walked around to the other side, got in beside her. The convoy pulled away from the curb, smooth and unhurried, and Zariah sat with her hands in her lap and watched Chicago's gray skyline rearrange itself through the tinted window, and did not cry. Not because she wasn't close to it, because she was saving it, because there was still too much left to do, and she couldn't afford to spend herself on tears yet, not with Preston and Garfield still standing on that sidewalk behind her, watching her drive away, trying to figure out what had just happened and what it was going to cost them. She had a pretty good idea what it was going to cost them. She had spent 11 months calculating. The city moved past the window in long gray sheets. Tae-jun sat beside her without speaking. He didn't reach for her, didn't offer platitudes, didn't fill the silence with anything that would require her to respond. After several minutes, Zariah said, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said. "The convoy was excessive." "Probably." She turned to look at him. He was watching the city too. His profile was the same, the set of his shoulders. "Why are you here, Tae-jun?" He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Because you finally left." It wasn't an answer, not exactly, but it was true, and sometimes true is the best thing available. Zariah turned back to the window. Outside, Chicago went on doing what Chicago does in winter, cold, gray, indifferent, and alive in ways you had to look closely to see. She looked closely. For the first time in a long time, she let herself. The convoy moved north out of Chicago in the kind of flat, pewter gray afternoon that makes the city feel temporary, like it was built quickly and could be disassembled just as fast. Zariah sat with her coat still on, her bag across her lap, watching the lakefront disappear behind them as they crossed into the expressway traffic. She had not asked where they were going, she already knew. Her mother's house. The estate sat on a private stretch of shoreline in southwestern Michigan, 40 minutes past the state line, at the end of a gravel road that her mother had deliberately never had paved, because she said paved roads invited people who weren't invited. Evelyn Monroe had been a woman of strong opinions about boundaries. The house itself was large by anyone's standard. 4 bedrooms, a wide timber-framed porch that looked directly out over the water, a kitchen that always smelled like something was warming even when nothing was. But her mother had never called it an estate. She called it the house. The word estate belonged to people who needed other people to be impressed by them. Zariah had grown up spending summers there. Preston had spent 6 years trying to get her to sell it. It's underutilized, he'd said. It's just sitting there. You could liquidate it, reinvest the capital, do something meaningful with it. He had a way of framing things so that whatever she wanted to keep became irrational, sentimental, a failure of financial intelligence. She had resisted him on the house every time, which was the only category in 12 years of marriage where she had resisted him consistently and won. Everything else she had eventually surrendered, in small enough increments that she hadn't noticed the total until it was already staggering. They pulled off the highway as the lights started thinning toward late afternoon. One of the SUVs peeled off at the intersection, repositioning, and Zariah tracked the movement in the side mirror without comment. Tae-jun was on his phone. He had been for the last 20 minutes, not talking, reading. His thumb moved through screens with a kind of focused economy. He wasn't ignoring her. I was simply a man who did not perform attentiveness. He wasn't actually providing. "Who's at the house?" she asked. "2 of my people. They've been there since Monday." She turned to look at him. "Since Monday." "I wanted to make sure it was ready." "You assumed I'd say yes." He set the phone face down on his knee and looked at her properly. "I assumed you'd need somewhere to go that wasn't a hotel and wasn't his house. Whether you said yes to me specifically was your call." She held his gaze for a moment. There was something irritating about the precision of that answer, the way it was both technically considerate and also slightly infuriating because it was difficult to argue with. "I haven't agreed to anything," she said. "I know. I'm not staying under your protection like some kind of, you're staying in your mother's house," he said, "which belongs to you. My people are there because the property has been vacant for 8 months. And Preston's attorney sent a letter to your estate manager in October suggesting a sale review. I don't know if that letter was exploratory or a warning. I didn't want to find out after the fact." Zariah stared at him. "What letter?" "I had my attorney flag it. Your estate manager apparently didn't think it was worth escalating to you. The timing was when you were already deep in the audit preparation, and he didn't want to add, 'Leon didn't tell me about a letter from Preston's attorney.'" "No," Tae-jun said. "He didn't." She turned back to the window. Her jaw was tight. "I'll deal with Leon," she said. "I know you will." They drove the rest of the way in silence that was not entirely comfortable and not entirely uncomfortable. Somewhere in the back of her mind, Zariah was already reorganizing. Leon, the letter, what it meant that Preston had been quietly probing the estate's legal status, while simultaneously telling her in mediation that he had no interest in the Michigan property. 12 years of watching him operate had given her a functional map of how he moved. He always opened a back door before he locked the front one. She should have caught the letter herself. She filed that failure away, added it to the inventory. The house came into view around a curve in the gravel road, its timber frame dark against the gray sky, the porch light already on. Someone had cleared the drive. The lake behind the house was the color of steel. Zariah got out of the car before the driver fully stopped. She stood on the gravel for a moment, breathing cold air, looking at the structure her mother had bought with 30 years of savings from a pediatric nursing career and had called the house until the day she died. It looked smaller than memory, the way things always do, and more permanent. She was not going to cry. She walked up the porch steps. Inside, the house smelled like wood and lake air and something faint underneath that she could not identify immediately and then could, her mother's hand cream. Lavender and something else. She stopped just inside the door. One of Tae-jun's men, broad-shouldered, early 30s, the kind of face that did not invite questions, was in the kitchen. He nodded at her. "Ms. Monroe, there's food. I was told to let you know the heat's been running since yesterday." "Thank you," she said. She meant it. She walked through the front room and stood at the window that faced the lake. Behind her, she heard Tae-jun come in, heard him say something brief and quiet to his man, heard the man's footsteps move toward the back of the house. Then it was just the two of them and the view of dark water. "I need to call Dana," she said. "Go ahead." She called Dana from the kitchen while Tae-jun sat in the front room, not pretending he couldn't hear and not positioning himself to listen more closely. He had always had that quality, a kind of settled honesty about what he was doing that she had once found confusing because she wasn't accustomed to it. Dana picked up on the second ring. "Tell me about the letter from Preston's attorney to Leon," Zariah said. There was a pause. "Where did you hear about that? Does it matter?" "I should have flagged it. It came in during a brutal week, and I made a judgment call that it wasn't actionable given the divorce was already underway and the Michigan property was excluded from the settlement discussion. That was probably wrong." "It was wrong," Zariah said, not cruelly, flatly. "Yes, I'm sorry." Dana's voice was level. She was not the kind of woman who apologized expansively. One clean acknowledgement was her version of full accountability. The letter was technically framed as a request for information about the property's conservation easement status. But the underlying question was whether the estate had been inherited or purchased, and who held primary title. Because if it was purchased during the marriage, it wasn't. It transfers clean. It's yours, Zariah. But the inquiry suggests Preston was at least exploring whether there was a foothold. "He doesn't give up ground," Zariah said. "No, he doesn't." She hung up, stood in the kitchen for a moment. The man Tae-jun had stationed there had placed a covered pan on the stove and disappeared with a tact that seemed professional. She lifted the cover. Rice. Braised short ribs. Someone had thought about this. She replaced the cover and walked back to the front room. The letter was a title probe, she told Tae-jun. He was checking if there was a marital asset argument to be made. "That's what we thought. You discussed it. With my attorney, not with yours. I didn't have standing to interfere in your legal process." She sat down in the chair across from the couch where he was. The lake light was almost gone now. The porch lamp threw a pale stripe across the floor between them. "Why are you involved in this?" she said. "The real answer, not the careful one." He looked at her steadily. "Because I knew you before he got to you," Tae-jun said, "and I watched what happened from a distance because it wasn't my place to do otherwise. And there's a version of this where I did nothing, and you walked out of that courthouse today and had nowhere to go, and I wasn't willing to let that be what happened. You could have called me." "When? During the marriage?" She didn't answer. "You would have told me to stay out of it," he said. "Which would have been the right answer, so I stayed out of it until you signed." Zariah pressed her fingers against her temple. "This is complicated." "Yes," he agreed. "It is. I don't want to need you. I know that. I mean it. I spent 12 years being managed by a man who disguised it as care. I can't do another version of that." Something shifted in his face. Not hurt exactly, but close. "I know what Preston did, and I'm telling you I'm not doing that. But I also understand that my telling you that means very little right now because he told you things too." The honesty of that sat in the room between them. "Fair," she said, finally. He nodded once. She ate alone in the kitchen. He made calls from the front room. His voice was low and she couldn't make out words, only cadence. And the cadence was the specific register of a man giving instructions that would be followed without pushback. That was its own kind of information about who he was in the world outside this house. She cataloged it without deciding what to do with it yet. After, she sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and the folder she'd brought and a legal pad, and she began going through the audit firm's preliminary findings, which Dana had sent over that afternoon. It was methodical work. It required her to hold multiple threads simultaneously. The foundation's operating accounts, the shell structure Preston had used to route certain expenditures, the timeline of specific transactions. And she was good at this, had always been good at this, had spent 12 years being told by Preston that she was talented in a way that made her sound like a capable subordinate rather than a partner. She was not a subordinate. She was the one who had found the first irregular line item. She was the one who had built the folder. Around 9 that evening, her phone rang. Preston. She declined it. He called back. She declined again, then sent a single text to Dana. "He's calling. Log it." Dana responded in under a minute. Already noted. Don't engage without me present. At 10:15, her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. She let it go to voicemail. When she played the message, it was Celeste Vaughn's voice, slightly brittle at the edges, the kind of brittle that meant someone was working to sound more composed than they were. Zariah, I need to talk to you. Not about Preston. About, I need to talk to you. Please call me back. Zariah played it twice. Then she saved it, forwarded it to Dana with a timestamp, and went back to the audit documents. She didn't sleep well. The house was warm, but her body hadn't caught up with the heat yet, still running the cold adrenaline of the day. She lay in her mother's bed. She had put herself in the main bedroom, deliberately, because her mother's things were there and because she needed the continuity of them, and stared at the ceiling and thought about Celeste's voice. Not about Preston, which meant it was, in fact, about Preston. By morning, the audit firm had sent a second document. This one was not preliminary. Zariah read it at the kitchen table with coffee she'd made herself. The man from the night before was gone, replaced by someone else with the same professionally quiet energy, and she read it twice before she called Dana. The surgical fund transfer, she said when Dana picked up. I saw it, Dana said. Her voice was tight. The document outlined a wire transfer authorization bearing Preston's signature dated 11 weeks prior, directing $2 million from the Caldwell Foundation's Pediatric Surgical Assistance Fund into a holding entity connected to a luxury residential development project Preston was invested in. The transfer had been flagged and blocked by the Foundation's bank before it cleared, on the basis of a compliance review triggered by the unusual destination account. No funds had ultimately moved, but the authorization existed. Preston's signature was on it. Zariah set the coffee down. There are families in that fund, she said. Her voice came out lower than she expected. Kids waiting on surgery approvals. Families who applied because they couldn't cover the gap between insurance and procedure cost. I know. He tried to take $2 million from sick children to cover a real estate play. The transfer didn't go through. He tried. She stopped, breathed. Those families. Are they covered? Right now, today? Is the fund intact? It wasn't touched. The block? Are the families covered? She repeated. Dana paused. To my knowledge, yes. But the fund's operating reserve is lower than it should be because of separate expenditures we're still auditing, so there's some exposure in the reserve margin. Zariah closed the laptop. She walked to the front room. Tae-jun was already there, standing at the window, which meant he'd been awake for a while. He turned when she came in. She told him about the transfer authorization. She didn't summarize it. She told him the whole thing, with the numbers and the timeline and the part about the compliance flag and the families. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The reserve margin, he said. The shortfall. Dana thinks there's some exposure. He nodded once, slowly. I'll make a contribution through the Jeonhan Medical Fund. It'll be structured as an unrestricted grant to the Pediatric Assistance Program. Nothing that touches your legal process and nothing connected to my name publicly. Zariah stared at him. You can't just... The children aren't a legal strategy, he said. They're children. I know that, but you can't... Zariah. His voice was even, not cold, just clear. I'm not fighting your battle. I'm making sure kids don't get caught in the middle of it. That's a different thing. She wanted to argue. She found she couldn't, not on the merits. The logic was clean and the motivation seemed clean, and her instinct was still to reject it, because she had learned, slowly, through 11 months of reverse engineering 12 years, to examine every gesture from a powerful man before accepting it. This doesn't create an obligation, she said. No, it doesn't. If I find out later that you're going to use this as, then I'll have deserved whatever you do about it, he said. She studied his face. The morning light off the lake was flat and cold, and it showed everything. The line of tension in his jaw, the sleeplessness behind his eyes, the fact that this was not easy for him either. Being here like this, behaving like a man who'd earned the right to behave this way when they both knew the question of what he'd earned was still entirely open. Okay, she said. She went back to the kitchen and called Dana. I need you to look into the reserve gap further, she told her. I think it may be resolved, but I want an independent verification before we include it in any documentation. I'll get on it. Also, Zariah. Celeste's attorney reached out this morning. Zariah put the phone on the table for a moment, looked at the ceiling. She wants to cooperate, Dana said. With who? With the investigation. She's telling her attorney that Preston instructed her the diverted funds would be replaced before any audit could catch them. She's saying she has documentation. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the lake was still and dark. The trees at the edge of the property held a gray frost that had not yet decided whether to melt. She knew, Zariah said, not as an accusation, as a reckoning. She knew something, Dana said carefully. She was in the conference room yesterday, with the bracelet, sitting there like… Zariah stopped, started again. She knew, and she wore the bracelet to the signing. I can't speak to what she was thinking. I can, Zariah said. She was thinking Preston was going to win. She was sitting on his side of the table because she believed he was going to walk out of there intact, and she was going to be the woman who came with him. Dana didn't respond to that. What changed? Zariah asked. Between yesterday and this morning, what changed for her? I can only speculate. But the forensic audit notification went out to all Foundation board members as part of standard disclosure. Celeste is a named advisor on 2 of the Foundation's subcommittees. She would have received the notification. Zariah nodded slowly. She realized the audit was real, she said. That would be my read. And she realized Preston intends to push everything toward her. She told her attorney he already called her this morning. She says she told him she wasn't going to be… Dana paused, apparently reading from something. The one left holding the papers he signed. Zariah sat down. For a long time she said nothing. Outside, a branch on the old oak at the edge of the yard moved in the lake wind, dragging against the window frame with a slow, irregular scratch. Preston had built something elaborate and kept it held together by assigning pieces of the risk to people who trusted him. Celeste, the Foundation employees, the accountants who signed off on expense reports they didn't probe, the estate staff who followed instructions they weren't supposed to question, even Zariah herself, for years, managing the parts of their financial life he handed to her without understanding what the other hand was doing. Now Celeste was pulling her piece out, and the whole thing was going to fall. Tell her attorney we'll hear what she has, Zariah said. No deal, no promises. But we'll listen. Understood, Dana said. One more thing. Go ahead. Preston's office issued a statement this morning, preemptive. It describes the forensic audit as a bad faith litigation tactic initiated by his estranged ex-wife in coordination with unidentified outside parties. He's also suggesting, not explicitly, but the implication is there, that your current residents may raise questions about the audit's independence. Zariah was quiet for 3 full seconds. He's going to argue the audit is compromised, she said, because I'm staying in a house with proximity to… He doesn't name Tae-jun. He doesn't have to. If it becomes public that you left the courthouse with him, the optics are enough to muddy the water. Zariah stood up from the table. Her chair scraped against the wood floor. She walked to the doorway between the kitchen and the front room. Tae-jun was still at the window. He turned when she appeared. She looked at him. He looked back. Preston put out a statement this morning, she said. He's suggesting the audit is compromised by my relationship with outside parties. Tae-jun's expression did not change. He's scared. He's smart. There's a difference. She leaned against the doorframe. If he can create doubt about the audit's independence before the preliminary findings go public, he buys himself time. Time to move things. Time to restructure. Time to get ahead of what the audit is going to show. Then the findings need to go public before he finishes the sentence. It's not that simple. The audit firm has a process. You can't just… I'm not suggesting you interfere with the audit. His voice was flat and clear. I'm saying that Preston's statement itself becomes evidence of intent. He's a man who just got served with a forensic audit notification and whose immediate response is to issue a public attack on his ex-wife's credibility. That's not the behavior of someone who isn't worried. She looked at him. He was right. She hated that he was right because it meant things were moving faster than she had planned. And moving fast was how she'd made mistakes in the past. And she couldn't afford mistakes now, not with families in the surgical fund and Preston's statement already in circulation and Celeste somewhere on the other side of the city deciding whether her loyalty had a price. I need to go back to Chicago, she said. Tae-jun said nothing for a moment. Not yet, he said. Give Dana 12 hours to respond to the statement legally. If you show up in Chicago tomorrow morning, you're reacting. Preston's good at making people react. I know what Preston's good at. Then you know he built that statement to pull you back into his city on his timeline. Zariah's jaw was tight. She stood in the doorway for another moment. Then she went to the kitchen table, sat down, opened the laptop, and began drafting the instructions she needed to send to Dana. Tae-jun didn't follow her, didn't offer anything further, but she heard him make a call from the front room, low and brief, and she recognized from the cadence that it wasn't English, Korean, rapid, and clipped. And she did not know what he was setting in motion, only that he was setting something in motion, and that she was going to have to decide very soon how much of that she was comfortable not knowing. Her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen. It was a text from a number she recognized as one of Preston's secondary lines, the one he used when he didn't want a message logged under his primary account. "You think you know what you're doing. You don't know what I have on you." She stared at it for a long moment. Then she screenshotted it, forwarded it to Dana with the timestamp and source number, and typed back a single line. "This conversation is being documented." She put the phone face down on the table. Her hands were steady. Her heart rate was not. In the front room, Tae-jun finished his call. The house went quiet around her, just the lake wind and the branch and the low hum of the heat running through old pipes. And Zariah sat in her mother's kitchen with the weight of 11 months of work and 12 years of a life, and one very cold morning and one catastrophic text message, and understood with the clear, exhausted certainty of someone who had just run out of the option to be careful that there was no version of what came next that was going to be clean. Preston had just threatened her. On a documented line. He had done it because he was scared, and scared men with power are the most dangerous kind. And she knew this, had always known this, and had planned for it. But planning for a thing and living inside it when it arrived were two entirely different experiences. And sitting in this kitchen, in this house, she felt both the solidity of 11 months of preparation and the very real, very physical weight of understanding that Preston Caldwell was not finished, and that whatever he had convinced himself he held over her, he believed in it enough to put it in writing, which meant the next move couldn't wait for morning. She picked up the phone and called Dana back. "He just texted me a threat," she said. "Secondary line. I need you to file a motion to preserve all communications before he scrubs anything." Dana's voice went sharp and focused. "I'm on it. Send me the screenshot." "Already sent." Zariah looked at the lake through the kitchen window. Dark water, moving. "Dana, whatever he thinks he has, we need to know before he uses it." "Agreed. I'll have someone make some calls tonight." "One more thing." "Yes." "Tell the audit firm to accelerate the preliminary release. Whatever they have confirmed, I want it ready to file by end of week." Dana paused. "That's aggressive." "He just threatened me in writing," Zariah said. "Aggressive is the only language he understands." She hung up. In the front room, Tae-jun's footsteps crossed the floor. She heard him stop in the kitchen doorway. She did not turn around. "He threatened you," Tae-jun said. It wasn't a question. "By text, documented." A pause. "Do you want to know what I do about that?" She turned then. I was leaning against the door frame with his arms crossed, looking at her with an expression that was unreadable in the specific way of a man who had made a decision and was waiting to find out if he'd be allowed to implement it. "I want to know," she said, "and then I'll tell you what we're actually doing." He almost smiled. "Fair enough," he said. And outside, across the dark water, the lights of some far shore moved through the winter haze, distant and steady, and Zariah Monroe looked at them and understood that she had crossed something today she could not uncross, that the papers she had signed that morning were only the beginning of it, and that whatever Preston thought he held over her head was about to become the last mistake he'd make with her name in his mouth. Dana called back at 11:47 that night. Zariah was still at the kitchen table. She had moved through the audit documents twice more, cross-referencing transaction dates against a calendar she'd reconstructed from memory and from the emails she'd preserved. 12 months of Preston's movements mapped against the Foundation's financial activity, looking for the pattern underneath the pattern. Her coffee had gone cold an hour ago. The lake outside the window was invisible now, just sound, water against the shore, irregular and patient. She picked up on the first ring. "Talk to me," she said. Dana's voice had a quality to it that Zariah recognized from the two previous times in their working relationship, when something had gone seriously wrong. Not panic. Dana did not panic. Something more controlled and more alarming. The specific register of a woman choosing her words with surgical precision because the words mattered and she knew it. The motion to preserve communications is filed, Dana said. Judge Harlan's clerk confirmed receipt at 10:50. That's the good news. Zariah set down her pen. What's the bad news? Preston's team filed something tonight, an emergency petition. The kitchen was very quiet. On what grounds? Zariah asked. They're alleging that the forensic audit was initiated with the involvement of a third party who has a material financial interest in destabilizing Preston's business holdings. They're naming Seo Tae-jun. Zariah's hand on the table did not move. They're arguing the audit is a coordinated business attack, Dana continued, disguised as a divorce proceeding. They're citing Tae-jun's legitimate shipping and logistics operations as direct competitors to two of Preston's investment holdings. They're saying the audit is a weapon, not a legal remedy. Zariah stopped, started again. That's insane. Tae-jun has no connection to the audit. He doesn't need a direct connection. They only need to establish the appearance of one to get the petition in front of a judge. And Zariah, Dana stopped. Say it. They have photographs. Of you leaving the courthouse yesterday, of you getting into his vehicle, of his convoy, and they have another pause, shorter. They have a record of a wire transfer from the John Hahn Medical Fund to the Caldwell Foundation's Pediatric Surgical Assistance Reserve, made this morning. The transfer is documented. The blood left Zariah's face. She stood up from the table. She walked to the window and stood in front of it and looked at nothing, just the dark glass with her own reflection in it, pale and still. How do they already have that? She said. I don't know. The transfer was processed this morning. For them to have documentation of it already. Someone inside the foundation is feeding Preston information. Dana was quiet. Someone on the board, Zariah said, or administration, someone who has access to incoming grant notifications. That's my read too. Zariah pressed her palm flat against the cold glass. The John Hahn Medical Fund transfer. Tae-jun's contribution to protect the reserve for those families. The gesture she had accepted because it was, in isolation, the right thing to do. The gesture that was now Preston's evidence that she and Tae-jun had been coordinating long enough and closely enough for him to have pre-positioned charitable funds in anticipation of the audit's findings. It looked planned. It looked like strategy. It looked exactly like what Preston's attorney was telling a judge it was, and the fact that it wasn't, that it was simply a man choosing to make sure sick children didn't get caught in crossfire, was a fact she was going to have enormous difficulty proving under oath without making the situation worse. What does the petition ask for? She said. A temporary injunction, halting the forensic audit pending a full hearing on the conflict of interest allegation. The hearing would be scheduled within 30 days. 30 days. During which the audit findings cannot be filed, cannot be referenced in any proceeding, and cannot be disclosed publicly. Zariah turned from the window. 30 days. Enough time for Preston to restructure whatever the audit was about to expose. Enough time to move assets, dissolve the shell entities, make it look like the irregularities were historical administrative errors already corrected. Enough time to rebuild the narrative. The betrayed executive, the vindictive ex-wife, the dangerous foreign criminal she'd aligned herself with. He had been waiting for this. Not for the transfer specifically. He couldn't have predicted the transfer. But he had been waiting for any connection between her and Tae-jun that he could weaponize, and the transfer had handed him one with a timestamp and a paper trail. She walked to the doorway. Tae-jun was in the front room. He was not sitting. He was standing near the far wall with his phone to his ear, and when he saw her face, he ended the call in the middle of whatever was being said and put the phone in his jacket pocket. He filed an emergency petition, she said. They have the transfer. Tae-jun's expression was very still. Who inside the foundation? He said. I don't know yet. He moved to the couch and sat down and put his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor for a moment. It was the most unsettled she had seen him. Not panicked, not anything close to panicked, but the stillness cracked slightly, showing the edge of something underneath it. I made it worse, he said. You made a decision that I agreed to, she said. I made it worse. Stop. Her voice was harder than she intended. Right now I need you thinking forward, not backward. Can you tell me who has access to incoming grant notifications at the foundation administrative level? He looked up. That's not my world, Zariah. You know everyone in this city's money. Charitable administration is... Who would Preston have positioned on that board? Tae-jun was quiet for a moment. Then, Marcus Webb. She didn't recognize the name. Foundation board member, appointed 2 years ago. He runs a real estate consulting group that has referred several investors to Preston's development projects. They have a financial relationship that isn't disclosed in Webb's board bio. Zariah stared at him. You knew about Webb. I knew about the relationship. I didn't know he was actively feeding information. Why didn't you tell me? Because 2 days ago it was background intelligence and you had enough to manage. He met her eyes. That was a mistake. I should have told you. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Yes, she said. You should have. She went back to the kitchen and called Dana. Marcus Webb, she said when Dana picked up. Foundation board member, pull his financial relationship with Preston's investment group. I want every connection documented before morning. I'll have someone on it in the next hour, Dana said. Zariah, about the petition. What are our options? We can oppose it on the merits. The conflict of interest allegation is thin. There's no direct evidence Tae-jun directed or funded the audit. The transfer, while poorly timed, was to a separate fund and is independently documented as a charitable grant. Poorly timed, Zariah said. That's one way to say it. I'm trying to be accurate. A pause. The other option is we get ahead of it. We request an emergency hearing ourselves, and we bring Tae-jun in voluntarily to provide a sworn statement that he had no role in initiating or directing the audit. And if he does that, it neutralizes the allegation, but it also makes him a named participant in the proceedings, which has its own complications given who he is. Zariah looked at the ceiling. Let me talk to him, she said. I'll call you back in 20 minutes. She set the phone on the table and sat down and pressed both hands flat on the surface and breathed. This was the part she hadn't planned for, not specifically. She had planned for Preston to fight. She had planned for him to use every lever available. She had planned for the process to be ugly and slow, and for him to attempt to make her look unreliable. She had not planned for the lever to be Tae-jun, not because it wasn't obvious. In retrospect, it was the most obvious move available to a man who couldn't attack the evidence directly. But because she had not fully accepted, until this moment, how much ammunition she had handed Preston simply by getting in that car yesterday morning, she had needed somewhere to go. She had needed what Tae-jun provided. And Preston had turned her need into a weapon. She went back to the front room. Tae-jun was still on the couch. He had not moved. They want you to provide a sworn statement, she said, voluntarily, that you had no role in initiating or directing the audit. He looked at her. Okay, he said, you understand what that means. You become a named... I know what it means. He stood up. I'll do it. Your attorney needs to be involved before you agree to anything. My attorney will tell me it's inadvisable. Your attorney would be right. And I'll tell my attorney that the alternative is 30 days of injunction while Preston moves money and destroys evidence. He looked at her directly. This is your case, Zariah. But if my statement is the thing that keeps it alive, I'll make the statement. She looked at him for a long moment. Why? She said. Not rhetorically. A real question. He didn't look away. Because what he did with that surgical fund money is the kind of thing that doesn't get to walk away clean. Whatever it costs me to make sure it doesn't, that's the cost. She nodded once. I'll tell Dana, she said. She called Dana, relayed the decision, listened to Dana's brief and unsurprised acknowledgement. Dana had evidently expected this answer and was already preparing the paperwork, and then hung up and went to bed. She did not sleep. She lay in her mother's room and stared at the ceiling and listened to the lake and thought about Marcus Webb, who had sat on the foundation board for 2 years feeding information to Preston while children applied for surgical assistance grants. And she felt something move through her chest that was not quite rage and not quite grief, but lived in the same neighborhood as both. At 6 in the morning, she got up and made coffee and was standing at the kitchen window when her phone rang. It was a Chicago number she didn't know. She answered. Ms. Monroe. A woman's voice, careful and tired. My name is Renata Osei. I'm a federal investigator with the Financial Crimes Division. I'd like to meet with you today if possible. We've been following the Caldwell Foundation's financial activity for approximately 4 months, and we believe your forensic audit has uncovered material that intersects with an existing federal investigation. Zariah set down her coffee. Federal investigation into what? She said. Into Marcus Webb, Renata Osei said, and into several of Preston Caldwell's business holdings. Ms. Monroe, the pattern of transactions your audit firm has been mapping is larger than a single foundation. We think Caldwell has been using charitable infrastructure to facilitate capital movement across at least 3 states, and Webb has been one of the conduits. The kitchen was absolutely silent. How long? Zariah asked. We believe the structure has been in place for approximately 4 years. 4 years. Zariah stood very still. Miss Monroe, I know this is a significant amount of information very early in the morning. I'm sorry for that. But Preston Caldwell's emergency petition is going to be heard at 2 this afternoon, and if you can get to Chicago before then, what you know may be relevant to how we approach the next 12 hours. She said yes. She hung up. She stood in the kitchen for 30 seconds, not moving, doing the math. 4 years. She and Preston had still been a functioning marriage 4 years ago. Strained, increasingly distant, but technically functioning. She had still been helping manage the foundation's development strategy. She had still been the name on the founding documents, the public face of the charitable work, the woman who showed up at galas and shook hands and smiled for photographs. She had been the cover. Not intentionally, not knowingly, but she had been the respectable face of a structure that was, underneath, something else entirely. She pressed one hand to the counter and held it there. Her mother's kitchen. The lavender and something smell faint in the morning air. Outside, the lake was just beginning to show color at the edges of the sky. She went to the front room. Tae-jun was awake. He had not slept either, or not much. She could see it in the set of his jaw and the quality of his stillness, which had shifted from discipline to the kind of quiet that comes from a long night of thinking through worst cases. She told him about Renata Osei. She told him the 4-year number. She watched his face process it. He used the foundation to move money across state lines, Tae-jun said. That's what she's saying. Which means your name is on documents connected to a federal money movement investigation. Yes. The words sat between them. She watched him work through what that meant. Not for his position, not for the legal complications, but for her. For the woman standing in front of him, who had spent 11 months building a case against her ex-husband with meticulous, exhausting care, and had just learned that she had been, without her knowledge, a piece of a structure that was significantly more criminal than she had imagined. You didn't know, he said. No. They know you didn't know? Osei said they've been watching for 4 months. If they believed I was a knowing participant, they wouldn't have called me. They'd have subpoenaed me. She paused. But not knowing isn't the same as not being connected to it. Preston's attorney is going to find out about this investigation within hours if he doesn't already know. And when he does, he'll try to use your name on those documents, Tae-jun said, to argue that the audit is self-interested, that I'm trying to get ahead of my own exposure by destroying him first. She sat down in the chair across from him. Which is the opposite of true. But it's a coherent narrative. It's the kind of thing that plays in a courtroom. Tae-jun leaned forward. His hands were clasped between his knees. What does Osei need from you? My cooperation, my documents, everything I've compiled, which you were already providing to the forensic audit. Yes, but there's a difference between a civil divorce proceeding and a federal investigation. If I hand my documents to Osei, I'm a federal cooperating witness. That's a different designation. He looked at her. What are you thinking? He said. She looked back at him. I'm thinking that Preston built something I didn't see, she said. For 4 years, he used my name and my reputation and my presence as the public face of a charitable operation while he moved money through it. And I didn't see it. I found one irregular line item 11 months ago, and I thought I was uncovering a man who'd been stealing from a foundation to fund his mistress. She stopped. That's not what I found. No, Tae-jun said quietly. It isn't. I found the edge of something much larger, and I pulled the thread without understanding how far it went. She looked at her hands on her knees. If I had known, you would have done the same thing, he said. You would have pulled it anyway. I don't know that. I do. She looked up. His face was not offering comfort. It was offering a straight assessment from someone who had known her for a long time, and she had to sit with the possibility that he was right, and that this was not better or worse than comfort. It was simply more useful. I have to call Dana before I call Osei back, she said. Yes, And we need to be in Chicago by noon. The car can be ready in 30 minutes. She stood up, stopped, turned back. Tae-jun, the statement you agreed to make last night, the sworn statement about not directing the audit. Yes. If Preston's attorney finds out about the federal investigation before the 2 o'clock hearing, he'll try to delay the statement and use the investigation to discredit me. More than that, if he can tie your legitimate business operations to the federal investigation scope, he can argue that your voluntary appearance is itself a conflict of interest, that you're trying to access the proceedings. Tae-jun was quiet for a moment. He'd be arguing I'm trying to use a divorce court to gather intelligence on a federal investigation that might implicate my competitors, he said slowly. It's not true. It doesn't need to be true. No, she said. It doesn't. They looked at each other across the morning light. Outside, a bird crossed the window, fast and low over the water. The lake was fully visible now, gray-green and moving. So the statement may make things worse, Tae-jun said. It might. Then I won't make it today. He stood. But I'm still coming to Chicago. Tae-jun, not to the courthouse, not into any proceeding. He looked at her steadily. But I'm not sending you into this alone. She opened her mouth, closed it. She wanted to tell him she didn't need that. She wanted to mean it. She was not entirely sure she meant it. Fine, she said. 30 minutes. She went back to the kitchen, called Dana, and spent 11 minutes walking her through everything Osei had said, listening to Dana go very quiet in the specific way that meant she was filing information into a rapidly reorganizing framework and would need several minutes more to reach any conclusions. This changes the scope, Dana said finally, significantly. Yes. Are you prepared for what cooperation with a federal investigation means for your public profile, for the foundations? I'm prepared for what not cooperating means, Zariah said, which is that Preston walks away from a federal investigation because the person who had the most evidence was too afraid of optics to hand it over. Dana was quiet. Okay, she said. I'll contact Osei's office directly. We'll need terms of cooperation documented before you hand over anything. And Zariah, I know. Whatever Osei tells you in that room today, do not agree to anything without me present. I know, Dana. She hung up. She went to the bedroom and packed the folder and the laptop and the legal pad into her bag and zipped it closed. She stood in her mother's room for a moment, looking at the framed photograph on the dresser. Her mother at 35, standing on the porch of this house, squinting into the sun, laughing at something outside the frame. Evelyn Monroe had raised her daughter to notice the thing that was wrong before it got too big to fix. She had noticed. She had just been too deep inside it to understand what she was looking at. She picked up the bag and walked out. Tae-jun's driver had the car on the gravel when she came down the porch steps. The air was sharp and cold. The lake behind the house caught the early light in flat metallic sheets. She got in the car. Tae-jun got in beside her. The convoy pulled out down the gravel road toward the highway, toward Chicago, toward a 2 o'clock hearing and a federal investigation and a man who had spent 4 years building a structure with her face on the front of it. They were on the highway for 40 minutes before either of them spoke. The woman from the foundation, Zariah said. Celeste's voicemail. She said she had screenshots proving Preston told her the diverted money would be replaced. Yes, if she's telling the truth, if those screenshots show that Preston explicitly told Celeste the transfer would be covered before anyone noticed. That's not just civil fraud. That's documented criminal intent. Combined with the federal investigation, it becomes a pattern, Tae-jun said. Not a single incident, a practice. He did this before, Zariah said. It wasn't a question. Tae-jun looked at her. There's a donation record from 3 years ago. An emergency grant reversal on a housing assistance fund. The reversal was explained as an administrative error. I always thought it was something else. You never told me that either. I didn't know you were building a case 3 years ago, he said. She held his gaze. You've been watching him. I've been aware of him, Tae-jun said carefully. There's a difference. Not much of one. He didn't argue with that. She turned back to the window. The highway unrolled flat and gray ahead of them. Chicago was still 40 minutes away. The hearing was in 5 hours. In 5 hours, Preston's attorney was going to walk into a courtroom with photographs, a wire transfer record, and an allegation of coordinated business sabotage. In 5 hours, the emergency petition to halt the forensic audit was going to be heard by a judge who had received it at 10 the previous night and who had agreed to hear it on an emergency basis, which meant someone in Preston's network had enough pull to move a court calendar. In 5 hours, the thing Zariah had spent 11 months building might be suspended for 30 days while Preston dismantled it piece by piece. Unless Renata Osei could move faster. Unless the federal investigation was far enough along to make Preston's petition moot. Unless Celeste's screenshots were real and comprehensive and could be authenticated quickly enough to matter. 3 unless clauses. That was the entire architecture of what she had left. She felt the weight of it differently now than she had in the kitchen. Not heavier, exactly. More specific. The weight of something that had stopped being a plan and started being a situation, unpredictable and fast-moving and dependent on the decisions of people she did not control. She pulled out her phone and opened the text thread with Preston's secondary number. His threat from the previous night still sat there, black text on white. "You think you know what you're doing? You don't know what I have on you." She read it again. He had believed that when he sent it. Now she had to figure out if he was right. Because there was one possibility she had not let herself fully examine. One thread she had not pulled because pulling it meant asking a question she was afraid of the answer to. If the federal investigation had been running for 4 months, and Marcus Webb was a conduit, and the charitable structure had been active for 4 years, was there anything in those 4 years that Preston could point to? Any decision Zariah had made without understanding its full context? Any signature on any document that he could present to a judge as her knowing participation? She had not signed things blindly. She had been careful. She had been meticulous. But she had also been inside a marriage to a man whose entire skill was making complicated things look simple, and she had trusted him in places she should have verified, and there was a non-zero possibility that somewhere in 4 years of trust, misplaced in the wrong places, was something that looked, on paper, like something else. That was what Preston meant. That was what he had. She closed the text thread. Tae-jun was watching her. "What are you not saying?" he asked. She looked at him. "I need to see everything," she said. "Every document in the federal investigation file that touches my name, before I walk into any room today." His jaw tightened slightly. Osei won't share an active federal investigation file with a cooperating witness before cooperation terms are agreed. Then Dana needs to get those terms agreed in the next 2 hours. I know what it is." She held his gaze. "Tae-jun. If there's something in those files that Preston can use, if there's a document with my signature on it that I didn't understand the purpose of, I need to know before his attorney does." The car was quiet. Outside, the highway signs for Chicago began appearing. Tae-jun reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone and made a call. Korean, rapid, 3 sentences. He hung up. "My attorney is in the federal building on South Dearborn," he said. "She has a relationship with Osei's division chief. I'm asking her to request an emergency preview of the documentation scope, not the full file, just the index of materials that carry your name." It's not standard," he said. "No, it's not." "You're going to call in a favor." "I'm going to make a request," he said. "Whether it's a favor depends on the answer." She looked at him. He looked back. "This is who I am," he said quietly. "You know that. I operate in a world where knowing the right person in the right building matters. You can decide how you feel about that. But right now, this morning, it might be the thing that keeps your name off a document you don't want to see in a courtroom." The city materialized ahead of them, the skyline rising gray and familiar against a sky that had not decided whether to clear. Zariah looked at it. 12 years she had lived in that city, built something there she believed in, put her name on work she thought mattered. All of it had been made out of materials she hadn't fully seen. "Make the call," she said. Tae-jun nodded once. The convoy moved toward the city, and the morning moved with it, cold and fast, and somewhere ahead of them a courtroom was being prepared and a federal investigator was reviewing a file, and a woman named Celeste was sitting somewhere with screenshots on her phone, deciding whether to hand them over, and a man named Preston Caldwell was in a conference room with his attorney, believing he had won. He believed that because he had always won. He had built his life on the assumption that he would continue to. What he did not understand, what he had never understood because he had never considered her a serious opponent, only a manageable one, was that the woman he had spent 12 years slowly erasing had used the erasure itself as cover. Every quiet dinner, every swallowed objection, every morning she had gotten up and gone through the motions of a life she was simultaneously dismantling from the inside. She had been collecting, and now the collection was in the hands of a federal investigator, and the morning was running out of time, and Zariah Monroe was 40 minutes from the city where her name was about to mean something entirely different than it had meant the day before. And she was not ready, and she was terrified, and she was going to walk through the door anyway because there was no version of herself that did otherwise, and that was the one thing Preston had never managed to take from her. They reached the federal building on South Dearborn at 11:14. Tae-jun's attorney was already in the lobby. A Korean-American woman in her late 40s named Christine Yoon, compact and precise in a charcoal suit, the kind of woman who had spent 2 decades making herself indispensable to people who operated in spaces where the law bent without breaking. She shook Zariah's hand once, firm and brief, and did not waste time on pleasantries. "I got the index," she said. 14 documents carry your name. 12 are routine foundation filings. Your signature as co-founder, standard annual disclosures, 2 grant authorization forms from years 3 and 4, all consistent with your stated role. "And the other 2? Zariah said. Christine glanced at Tae-jun. He nodded once. "One is a letter of endorsement for a subsidiary entity connected to the Web Consulting Group, dated 2 years ago. Your signature appears below Preston's. The letter recommends the subsidiary for inclusion on a state charitable vendor registry." Zariah's jaw tightened. "I signed vendor endorsements regularly. Preston handled the vetting." "I know. The investigators know that too. Your endorsement pattern is consistent across 43 vendors over 4 years. This one is not distinguishable from the others on its face." Christine paused. "The second document is more complicated. Tell me." "It's an internal transfer authorization from 18 months ago, moving $340,000 from the Foundation's general reserve into a subsidiary account. Your name is in the authorization chain, not as a signatory, but as an approving officer in the workflow system. The record shows your login credentials approved the transfer at 11:17 on a Tuesday morning." Zariah stared at her. "I didn't approve a $340,000 transfer 18 months ago." "I know. My login credentials were used," Christine said. "Whether by you or someone with access to your credentials is the question the investigation has been sitting on." The lobby of the federal building was full of people moving through security, conversations bouncing off marble floors, the low industrial hum of a large building operating at capacity. Zariah stood in the middle of it and felt very still. Preston had her login. At some point in 12 years of shared systems, shared passwords, shared administrative access to a foundation they had built together, he had gotten her login and he had used it, and he had created a record that showed her name approving a transfer she had never seen. That was what he had. That was the thing he meant when he sent the text. "You don't know what I have on you." He had 18 months of a document sitting in a federal investigation file with her credentials on it. And if he could get a 30-day injunction on the forensic audit, 30 days of her name attached to that transfer, without context, without the evidence she had compiled, without the pattern that showed it was an anomaly and not a practice, 30 days was enough for a good attorney to build an alternative narrative. Not that she was innocent, that she was a co-conspirator who had turned on her partner. She pressed her thumbnail hard into her palm, felt the sharp edge of it, breathed through her nose. "Where's Osei?" she said. "8th floor," Christine said. She's expecting you at 11:30. "What's the documentation situation for the transfer? System logs, access records, IP addresses?" "That's what I need you to help me understand. Were you in the office that Tuesday morning 18 months ago? Do you have any record of your whereabouts?" Zariah thought. 18 months ago. She had still been working from the Foundation's Michigan Avenue office 3 days a week at that point. Tuesday was one of them. 11:17 in the morning. "I would have been in a staff meeting," she said slowly. "We had standing Tuesday morning development meetings from 10 to noon. There would be a calendar record, attendance logs, meeting minutes." Christine's expression shifted slightly. Not relief. Something more careful than relief. The look of a woman who has just seen a door that might open. "If you were in a documented meeting at 11:17, Someone else used your credentials remotely, she said. Preston had access to my login from the Foundation's shared admin system, Zariah said. He set up the system. He had override access to every user credential. Can you prove that? The IT vendor who built the system is still under contract. They'll have the admin access logs. Christine looked at Tae-jun. He looked at Zariah. The vendor, he said. Do you have a contact? I have the contract in my files. She was already pulling out her phone. His name is Derek Cho. He runs a small IT firm in Wicker Park. He's been maintaining the Foundation system for 6 years. She found the number in her contacts and handed the phone to Christine. Call him, she said. Tell him I need the admin access logs for the Foundation's authorization workflow system for a Tuesday morning 18 months ago. Full timestamp record for credential usage. He'll understand what that means. Christine took the phone and walked toward a quieter corner of the lobby. Tae-jun moved closer to Zariah. You're all right? He said quietly. I'm functioning, she said. That's not what I asked. She looked at him. His face was close enough that she could see the specific quality of the concern there. Not performed, not strategic, just present. He used my login, she said. The words came out flat. He sat at a computer somewhere and typed in my credentials and approved a $340,000 transfer and then went on with his day. And for 18 months, that record has been sitting in a federal file. And it's going to be explained, Tae-jun said. It's going to have to be proven, she said. There's a difference. He held her gaze. Then we prove it, he said. She nodded once, looked away. At 11:30, they were on the 8th floor. Renata Osei was a tall black woman in her early 50s with close-cropped gray at her temples and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She had the energy of someone who had been doing difficult work for a long time and had stopped being surprised by any of it. Her office was neat in the specific way of a person who manages chaos professionally. Everything had a place. The place made sense. Nothing decorative that didn't serve a function. She shook Zariah's hand and gestured to the chairs across from her desk. Dana was already there, sitting straight-backed with her own leather folder open on her knee. She had driven in from her office. She looked at Zariah with a focused, assessing look and gave a small nod. Osei sat down and laced her fingers together on the desk. Ms. Monroe, she said, thank you for coming in on short notice. I know the timing is complicated. There's a hearing at 2, Zariah said. I'm aware of the timing. Yes. Let me be direct with you because I think that serves everyone better. We've been building a case against Preston Caldwell's financial network for 4 months. The charitable foundation is one piece of it. Web is another. There are 2 additional entities we're still mapping. Your forensic audit has been enormously useful, more useful than you probably realize, because it documents the internal mechanics of the foundation's transaction structure in a way that corroborates our external tracing. You need my documents, Zariah said. We need your cooperation and your documents, yes. And in exchange? Osei looked at her steadily. We make clear to the court, and to the public record, that you are a cooperating witness and not a subject of the investigation, which, for the record, you are not. We have sufficient evidence to establish you had no knowledge of the broader structure. What about the authorization workflow record? Zariah said. The transfer 18 months ago with my credentials. Osei did not look surprised, which meant she had known about it, had expected Zariah to find out, and had been watching to see how she would handle it. We flagged that record early in the investigation, Osei said. The credential usage pattern is inconsistent with your normal system behavior. You logged in from a different IP address outside your normal hours and approved a transaction that was categorically different in scale from anything else in your approval history. Our technical team's assessment is that the credentials were used by someone else. Preston had admin override access, Zariah said. The IT vendor can pull the access logs. Osei nodded slowly. If those logs confirm admin override activity on that date and time, it substantially closes the question. I'd like your vendor contact. Dana leaned forward and produced a business card from her folder. Already obtained, she said. Christine Yoon is on the phone with him now. Osei took the card, looked at it, set it on the desk. All right, she said. Here's the situation. Preston's emergency petition is being heard at 2. His allegation is that your audit was initiated in bad faith in coordination with Seo Tae-jun's business interests. If that petition succeeds, the audit findings are suppressed for 30 days. I know, Zariah said. What you may not know is that a 30-day suppression creates a problem for us as well. Several of the transactions we've been tracing are connected to accounts that will be accessible for restructuring during that window. We've been working to get ahead of that, but the petition forces our hand. Zariah looked at her. You're going to move before 2 o'clock, she said. Osei looked back at her without confirming or denying it. What I need from you, Osei said carefully, is for you to be available and cooperative for the next several hours. Whatever happens in that courtroom today, and I want to be clear that we have no control over the outcome of a civil proceeding. I need to know you're with us. I've been building a case for 11 months, Zariah said. I'm with you. Osei nodded, stood, extended her hand. Zariah shook it. They were back in the elevator at 12:04. Dana checked her phone and stepped slightly to the left, lowering her voice. I have confirmation from the audit firm, she said. Preliminary findings are formatted and ready to file. If the petition is denied, I can have them submitted within the hour. And if the petition is granted, Zariah said, we appeal, but it costs us time. The elevator opened on the lobby. They walked out into the cold noon air. Tae-jun was on the sidewalk. He had not come upstairs. Christine was beside him, finishing a call. Derek Cho confirmed the admin access log, Christine said as they approached. Override credentials were used at 11:14 on the date in question. The override activity originates from an IP address registered to Preston Caldwell's personal home network. The words landed in the cold air and stayed there. He had done it from home. He had sat in their house, their home, the lakeside mansion where Zariah had lived for 9 years, opened a laptop, logged into the foundation system with her credentials using his administrative override, and approved a $340,000 transfer. Then he had closed the laptop and gone about his day. Zariah stood on the sidewalk in the December cold and felt something move through her that was not grief and not rage, and was specifically, precisely, the sensation of a person understanding the full shape of something for the first time. She had lived with this man. She had made him coffee in the morning, sat across from him at dinner, argued about the temperature of the bedroom and the right way to load a dishwasher and whether the Scottsdale property was worth keeping. She had been present for the human texture of his daily existence, his moods, his habits, his preferences, his smallest irritations. And underneath all of that, parallel to all of that, he had been doing this. Zariah, Tae-jun's voice. She looked at him. The log goes to Osei, she said. Christine is sending it now, he said, directly to Osei's office. She nodded. We need to be at the courthouse by 1:30, Dana said. They moved. The convoy reformed on the street. One SUV ahead, the sedan, one behind. Chicago moved around them in the cold noon light, dense and indifferent, the city running on its own logic regardless of the individual dramas playing out in its buildings and courtrooms and law offices. In the car, Zariah did not speak for several minutes. She was thinking about Celeste. If Celeste's screenshots showed Preston explicitly stating the diverted surgical funds would be replaced before anyone noticed, and if those screenshots were authenticated, and if the IT log confirmed the credential theft, and if Osei moved before 2 o'clock, then what Preston had constructed over 4 years was going to come apart in a single afternoon. But if Celeste lost her nerve, if the screenshots couldn't be authenticated quickly enough, if the judge at 2 o'clock was sympathetic to Preston's petition for reasons Zariah couldn't control, she pulled out her phone. She dialed Celeste's number. 3 rings. 4. Then, hello. Celeste's voice was different than it had been in the voicemail. Less careful. More exhausted. The voice of someone who had been awake for a long time doing difficult thinking. It's Zariah, she said. A pause. I know. I need to know if the screenshots are real. They're real. And you can authenticate them? Timestamps, metadata, the original thread? Yes. A breath. He texted me from his personal phone. The thread goes back 11 months. I have everything. Celeste. Zariah kept her voice level. Preston is going to argue in court at 2 o'clock that I coordinated this entire thing. He's going to try to stop the audit for 30 days. If that happens, I know what that means. Celeste's voice was flat. He called me this morning. He said if I cooperated with anyone, he had enough to connect me to the transfer as a knowing participant. Did he? No. Her voice was tight. I didn't know the specifics. I knew he moved money sometimes. I knew the foundation was... I knew it wasn't entirely what it looked like. But I didn't know about the Children's Surgical Fund. When he told me... She stopped, started again. He told me the $2 million would go back before anyone noticed. He said it was a temporary bridge. He said he'd done it before without any issue. The car was very quiet. He said he'd done it before, Zariah repeated. Yes. Is that in the screenshots? A pause. Yes, Celeste said. Zariah closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Where are you right now? She said. My apartment, River North. Dana Okafor is going to call you in the next 10 minutes. You need to answer and you need to tell her everything you just told me. Can you do that? A long pause. He's going to destroy me, Celeste said. He was going to destroy you anyway, Zariah said. He put you in that room yesterday with the bracelet on your wrist, so a courtroom full of people would associate your face with the foundation money. He was building the picture before the picture was needed. Silence. I know, Celeste said quietly. You have one window, Zariah said. It closes at 2 o'clock. Another pause, then, tell your attorney to call me. Zariah hung up, looked at Dana. Call her, she said. Now, get the screenshots authenticated before 1:30. Dana was already dialing. The courthouse was visible ahead through the windshield. The car slowed in the approach traffic. Tae-jun's hand rested on the seat between them, not touching her, just present, close enough that she was aware of it. After this is over, he said quietly, not looking at her. Don't, she said. I'm not making a declaration, he said. I'm just... After this is over, I want to say something to you. Not today. She glanced at him. His jaw was set. His eyes were on the road ahead. He was not performing composure. He was a man who was composure, who had built it out of years of navigating situations where losing it had real costs. And today it was costing him something. She could see that, the specific effort of sitting in this car and not doing the things he was capable of doing, staying on the right side of a line he had drawn for himself. Okay, she said. They arrived at 1:22. The courthouse steps were busier than Zariah expected. 2 news cameras she hadn't anticipated, which meant Preston's team had tipped someone. She registered the cameras with the flat, filing awareness that had been running since morning, logged it, noted it, did not react to it. Tae-jun got out of the car on the opposite side and walked around. He came to stand slightly behind her left shoulder. Not in front, not beside, just behind, just close enough. The cameras tracked the configuration. She could see the calculation happening in the eyes of the nearest cameraman, trying to frame the shot, trying to understand the relationship between these 2 people and what story it told. She walked up the steps without looking at the cameras. Dana was on the phone walking alongside her, speaking rapidly in the specific truncated shorthand she used when processing multiple simultaneous information streams. She snapped the phone away as they reached the doors. Celeste's attorney just confirmed. Screenshots are authenticated. Metadata verified. He's filing a motion to intervene in the 2 o'clock hearing on Celeste's behalf. Zariah absorbed that while pushing through the door. Preston's attorney will oppose, she said. Garfield will try. But if a named advisory member of the foundation is filing a motion to intervene with authenticated documentary evidence of the principal's criminal intent, Dana's voice had a quality Zariah had not heard from her before. Almost, something like satisfaction. It changes the character of the hearing. They were in the corridor. The courtroom was at the end of it. Zariah could see through the small, reinforced window in the door that the room was already occupied. She could see the back of Garfield's silver head at the counsel table. She stopped walking. Preston is in there, she said. Yes. She stood in the corridor for a moment. The fluorescent lights overhead were the specific institutional hum of a building that runs on procedure. The floor was that particular courthouse tile that absorbs sound without quite eliminating it. She thought about the morning she had found the first irregular line item, how she had sat at her desk in the Michigan Avenue office and looked at it for a long time before she understood what she was seeing, how she had not called anyone, had not said anything, had quietly begun pulling threads, how every subsequent discovery had required her to renegotiate her understanding of the previous 11 years. She had been so careful. She had been almost careful enough. The door to the courtroom opened from inside and a clerk appeared, looked at them, and said the judge would be ready in 5 minutes. Zariah straightened her shoulders, walked to the door. Behind her, she heard Tae-jun stop at the corridor bench. He was not going in, had not been going in, had known from the beginning that this room was not his. She heard the quiet sound of him sitting down on the bench and staying there. She pushed through the door. The room was not large. Courtrooms for civil motions hearings rarely are. The ceiling was lower than a full trial courtroom, the lighting harsher, the configuration more functional. Counsel tables, a raised bench, a court reporter already positioned, a small gallery of perhaps 12 seats. Preston was at the plaintiff's table with Garfield and one associate. He turned when the door opened and his eyes found Zariah. Immediately, the way they always had the reflexive tracking of a man who needed to know where she was in any room. He looked bad, not disheveled. Preston Caldwell did not do disheveled, but wrong somehow, in a way that took her a moment to identify. He looked like a man who had spent the night revising downward his assessment of how this day was going to go, and the revisions had cost him something visible. She held his gaze for 2 seconds. Then she walked to the respondent's table and sat down. Dana sat beside her. At 1:58, Garfield rose and delivered a motion that was clean and well-constructed. She had expected that. Conflict of interest allegation, Tae-jun's business operations, the timing of the charitable grant, the photographs from the courthouse. He was measured, precise, and clearly had not yet been informed of Celeste's attorney's intervention motion. The judge, a compact woman in her late 60s named Caldecott, who had, according to Dana's research, spent 15 years on the federal bench before moving to the civil division, and who was specifically not known for theatrical decisions, listened without visible reaction. When Garfield finished, Dana rose. She spoke for 11 minutes. She addressed each element of the conflict of interest allegation with documentary evidence. The audit firm's retainer agreement predating any contact between Zariah and Tae-jun, the timeline of the forensic engagement, the independent structure of the audit firm's methodology. She introduced the IT vendor log, confirming admin credential override activity originating from Preston's home network. She introduced the Jeonhan Medical Fund grant documentation, establishing it as an unrestricted charitable contribution with no conditionality. She was 4 minutes in when Garfield stood to object. Judge Caldecott looked at him. "Sit down, Mr. Garfield," she said. "You'll have your response time." He sat. Dana finished. Then Celeste's attorney, a young, fast-moving man named Torres, who had arrived slightly out of breath and whose suit was slightly wrong for the room, but whose documentation was exact, rose and presented his motion to intervene. The room changed. Garfield's head came up sharply. His associate leaned toward him and whispered something. Garfield's hand went flat on the table, the gesture of a man receiving information that requires immediate reprocessing. Preston turned and looked directly at Zariah. His face was, for the first time in 12 years, entirely unguarded. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Then the control came back, the executive composure, the practiced steadiness. But she had seen it, the flash of something raw and cornered, and underneath the anger, afraid. Torres laid out Celeste's screenshots in summary. Preston's explicit statement that diverted funds would be replaced before anyone noticed. His statement that he had done it before without issue. The 11-month text thread establishing a documented pattern of communication regarding foundation finances. Judge Caldecott's pen moved across a legal pad. When Torres finished, Garfield asked for a 20-minute recess. The judge denied it. "We'll proceed," she said. "Mr. Garfield, your response to the intervention motion." Garfield stood. He was very good. In different circumstances, watching him work would have been interesting. The way he pivoted on 3 seconds of processing time. The way he restructured his argument on the fly to absorb the new information. The way he tried to characterize Celeste as a compromised witness with her own legal exposure. I was doing what a very good attorney does in a losing position, buying time and planting doubt. But the judge had the screenshots. She had the IT vendor log. She had the audit firm documentation. She had Torres's intervention motion and the authenticated metadata. At 2:47, Judge Caldecott set down her pen. "The petition for injunction is denied," she said. "The allegation of conflict of interest is not supported by the evidence presented. The forensic audit will proceed. The motion to intervene is granted. A full hearing on the documentary evidence introduced today will be scheduled within the next 14 days. She looked at Garfield. I would also note for the record that credential misappropriation as documented in the IT vendor logs may warrant referral to the appropriate authorities. I'll be reviewing that question. Garfield said, Your Honor, we're adjourned, she said. The court reporter stopped typing. The room exhaled. Zariah sat at the counsel table and did not move for a moment. Dana's hand found her arm briefly. A contact, quick and real, the physical punctuation of something finished. We hold, Dana said quietly. Zariah nodded. She looked across the room. Preston was on his feet. Garfield was speaking to him in a low, urgent voice, the specific posture of an attorney managing a client who is about to do something that will cost them. Preston was not listening. I was looking at Zariah with an expression that had moved past the flash of fear she'd seen earlier into something colder and more deliberate. He took 2 steps toward her. Garfield caught his arm. Preston shook him off. He walked to the space between the counsel tables and stopped. 3 feet, close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw, the specific quality of his breathing, shallow and fast, badly controlled. You did this, he said. His voice was low, not quiet. Low. The specific register of something being held back with effort. She stood up. She had not planned to. Her body made the decision before her mind caught up, the old animal instinct of standing when approached. Not to fight, but to not be sitting when you don't have to be. You did this, she said back. You did it over 4 years and you put my name on pieces of it, and you sat in our house and used my login to cover a transfer, and you put your mistress in a courtroom with evidence around her wrist. She kept her voice even, not performing calm, actually calm, in the way that sometimes arrives on the other side of a very long run, the calm of a person who has nothing left to hold back. I found one irregular line item. That's all I did. You built the rest. His jaw moved. I will... He stopped. Seemed to remember the room, the court reporter, the clerk still at her station. He stopped. I know, Zariah said. You'll do something. You always do something. She picked up her bag from the table. And I'll document it. She walked past him. Through the gate in the gallery railing. Down the short aisle. Through the door. The corridor was empty except for Tae-jun, who was exactly where she'd left him. On the bench along the wall, elbows on knees, watching the door. He stood when she came out. She walked toward him, and she was almost to him when the door opened behind her and she heard Preston's voice. Not controlled now, not executive measured, just a man's voice, stripped of its architecture. Zariah. She stopped. Tae-jun looked past her at Preston. His face was perfectly still. His hands were at his sides. She turned around. Preston stood in the doorway of the courtroom. Garfield was behind him, hand on his shoulder, pulling without quite pulling. Preston's tie was slightly off-center. The first time in 12 years she had seen his tie off-center. His face was the face of a man who had just watched something he believed was solid turn out not to be. You think this is done? He said. She looked at him. She was going to say something measured, something final and clean. She had, in her mind, over 11 months, occasionally drafted the things she would say to Preston Caldwell when the moment arrived. Some version of a closing argument, something that would name what he'd done with the precision it deserved. She didn't say any of it. I didn't ruin you, she said. I just stopped protecting you from yourself. He stared at her. Garfield moved in front of him then, fully, deliberately, a physical interruption, and said something urgent and quiet into Preston's ear. Preston's eyes stayed on Zariah for another second. 2. Then he let Garfield steer him back. The courtroom door closed. Zariah turned back around. Tae-jun was 3 feet away, close. His eyes were on her face, reading something there, not asking about it. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. It was Renata Osei. She answered. Miss Monroe? Osei's voice was crisp and deliberate. I wanted you to know before you saw it on the news. We executed search warrants on Preston Caldwell's business offices and his home approximately 12 minutes ago. Federal agents are also at Marcus Webb's office in the Loop. This is consistent with the timeline we've been working toward, and your cooperation today materially contributed to our being in a position to move. Zariah's hand on the phone was very steady. The home, she said. The lakeside mansion. Yes. The lakeside mansion where Patricia had packed Zariah's belongings out of the master bedroom at Preston's instruction and left a handwritten note under her door. She breathed in through her nose. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "Thank you for what you built," Osei said. "It held up." The call ended. The corridor was very quiet. Dana was coming through a door at the far end. She had stayed behind for something, a clerk, a document, and now she was moving quickly toward them, reading something on her phone, her face arranged in the focused satisfaction of a woman who has just seen the work do what it was supposed to do. Zariah looked at Tae-jun. He was watching her with the specific stillness she had been cataloging since the courthouse steps the morning before. The stillness that was not absence but its opposite, an enormous amount of something held inside a very controlled surface. "Federal agents are at the mansion," she said. He nodded slowly. "And the petition is denied," she said. "I know," he said. "I could hear the room from out here." She looked at him. "You sat in a hallway for 2 hours," she said. "I've sat in worse places for longer." Something moved through her chest. Not the hollow place, not grief. Something different, smaller and warmer and less certain of itself, which made it harder to put down than either of the others. "You said after this was over you had something to tell me," she said. He looked at her carefully. "It's not over yet," he said. "I know." She held his gaze. "Tell me anyway." His mouth opened. And then Dana arrived, slightly breathless, holding her phone out with the screen facing up. And on the screen was a news alert that had pushed 3 minutes ago from a Chicago business reporter who had sources inside the federal building, and the headline read, "Federal agents execute warrants on Caldwell Investment Group and associated entities in multi-state financial investigation." Below it, a second alert pushed 90 seconds later. Caldwell Foundation board member Marcus Webb detained for questioning. And below that, pushed while they were standing there reading the first two. Preston Caldwell, attorney, confirms client will not be making statement at this time. Dana lowered the phone. The three of them stood in the courthouse corridor in the flat institutional light and the low building hum and said nothing for a moment. Tae-jun put his phone in his jacket pocket. He turned to look at Zariah, and his face, which had been controlled and careful and deliberately neutral for 40 hours, did something she had not seen it do since they were young and the city was different and the future was wide. It just rested. No calculation behind the eyes, no management of expression, just a man looking at a woman in a corridor after a very long 2 days, and something in the look that had no name she wanted to give it yet. "I said I wanted to tell you something," he said. "You did," she said. "I loved you before any of this," he said. "Before the divorce, and before the folder, and before the convoy. I want you to know that because everything that comes next, you need to know it started before I could be useful to you." The corridor was very quiet. Dana had taken several steps away in the specific manner of a woman giving space that is needed. Zariah looked at Tae-jun. She thought about the car ride north, the kitchen in Michigan, the hallway bench, the 2 hours he had spent sitting outside a room he was not in so that she could be in it without him. She thought about what it cost a man like him, a man accustomed to rooms reorganizing themselves around his presence, to deliberately stay outside one. She thought about Preston, who had spent 12 years in the same rooms as her and had never once considered what it cost her to be in them. "I know it started before," she said. He held her gaze. "Okay," he said quietly. Her phone buzzed again. She looked at the screen. Osei again. A text this time, 4 words. "He's being brought in." Preston Caldwell was being arrested. Zariah stood in the corridor of the courthouse with that information in her hand, and the audit findings cleared to file, and the federal warrants executed, and Tae-jun standing 3 feet away with his face finally unguarded, and Dana at a discreet distance, and somewhere in this building behind her, Garfield was on the phone with a very different kind of client management than he had anticipated this morning. She looked down the corridor. At the end of it, through the tall window, the Chicago skyline was visible in the late afternoon gray. The same skyline she had watched rearrange itself through a tinted car window 36 hours ago, leaving the courthouse a different woman than she had entered it. She was a different woman still. The costs of that difference were not yet fully countable. Her name was in a federal investigation file. Her marriage was a legal ruin. Her foundation was going to require rebuilding from its structural supports upward. There would be months of this, hearings, depositions, the slow grinding procedural work of consequence. She knew all of that. She also knew, standing in this corridor, with the audit cleared and the warrants executed, and the man she had been erasing herself to protect now facing what he had always deserved to face, that she was going to be all right, not perfect, not restored to some version of herself that existed before. That version was gone and she had stopped grieving it somewhere around month 8 of the last 11. But all right, grounded, in possession of herself. She slipped her phone into her bag. She looked at Tae-jun one more time. "You were going to say something else," she said, before Dana came back. He was quiet for a moment. "I was going to say that I've spent 4 years making sure I didn't cross a line I had no right to cross," he said, "and I think that's done now." She looked at him. The late light through the window at the end of the corridor found the side of his face and held it there for a moment. The jaw, the careful eyes, the ink just visible at his collar. She didn't say anything. She just held out her hand. He looked at it, then he took it. And in the corridor of a Chicago courthouse on a gray December afternoon, with federal warrants running across the city and a news cycle spinning into motion and 11 months of work, finally becoming consequence, Zariah Monroe stood with her hand in Tae-jun's hand and felt the specific, unmistakable weight of a life that had stopped being something done to her and become something she was choosing. And outside the window, the city went on in all its cold and difficult beauty, indifferent and alive. The same city it had always been, holding every story that had ever happened inside it without judgment, just holding them the way cities do. They walked out of the courthouse into late afternoon air that cut straight through wool and resolve alike. The city was already moving on the story. Dana got the first call from a reporter before they reached the bottom of the courthouse steps. She declined it with 2 words and pocketed her phone and kept walking. A second camera crew had materialized near the street, repositioning toward the building's entrance, not yet aware that the primary subject had already come and gone. Tae-jun did not reach for Zariah's hand again after the corridor. He walked beside her with the same deliberate distance he had maintained since Chicago, close enough to matter, far enough that no camera could tell the story for them. She noticed the discipline of it and said nothing about it. She said nothing about much in those first few minutes. The arrest was public by 4:17. Dana's phone confirmed it. Preston Caldwell, taken from his attorney's offices on North Wacker, not from the courthouse, which meant Osei's team had moved on multiple fronts simultaneously and with a precision that suggested 4 months of preparation rather than 4 hours. Zariah read the notification Dana showed her and handed the phone back. She felt less than she expected to feel. Not nothing, but less than the enormous release she had been unconsciously anticipating, the moment when the weight would lift and she would understand that it was over. Instead, what arrived was something quieter and more complicated, a kind of flat, careful recognition. It happened. It's real. He's in custody. The children's fund is intact. The audit findings are cleared to file. And she was standing on a sidewalk in December with her coat buttoned wrong. She noticed it now, had done it in the dark of the morning at the Michigan house, the second button through the third hole. And her feet hurt from hours in court shoes and her eyes were burning from not enough sleep across too many consecutive nights. She rebuttoned her coat. That was the first thing she did after Preston Caldwell was arrested. She fixed her coat buttons. Tae-jun watched her do it without comment. "I need food," she said. "A real meal, not courthouse vending machines." "There's a place 3 blocks from here," he said. "Not somewhere you own." He paused. "I have a partial stake in a restaurant on somewhere ordinary," she said, "somewhere with bad lighting and paper menus." He thought for a moment. "There's a diner on South State. It's been there since 1987 and the lighting is genuinely terrible." "That's where we're going." Donna peeled off at the corner. She had 7 calls to return, the audit findings to formally file, and a conversation with Osei's office about the documentation timeline. She squeezed Zariah's arm once before she went, a brief and wordless gesture, the kind that meant more than most sentences. Christine Yoon left with her. The convoy reduced itself. Tae-jun dismissed the second SUV with a brief word to the driver, and what remained was a single car and a driver who understood from long practice how to be invisible. They walked the 3 blocks instead of riding them. The cold helped. It gave her something physical to respond to that wasn't the inside of her own head. The diner was exactly what he had described. A narrow room with a counter along one wall, 8 booths with red vinyl seating gone soft at the corners, fluorescent tubes overhead with one slightly flickering, and a laminated menu that had clearly not been redesigned since the establishment opened. It smelled like coffee and bacon grease and something sweeter underneath. A woman in her 60s with the energy of someone who had been on her feet since before Zariah was born showed them to a booth at the back without asking if they wanted it. They sat. Zariah looked at the menu for about 40 seconds, then set it down and ordered coffee and a turkey club and a bowl of tomato soup from the woman, who refilled the table's water glasses before leaving. Tae-jun ordered coffee and nothing else. She looked at him. "Eat something," she said. "I'm not hungry." "You've been awake since before I was. Eat something." He looked at the menu, ordered eggs and toast without further argument. They sat with the coffee between them and the diner noise around them, a couple with a young child. 2 booths over, 2 men in work jackets at the counter, the television above the coffee station running a local news channel on mute with captions running. And for several minutes, neither of them said anything that needed to be said. Then she saw the caption scroll across the bottom of the television screen. "Caldwell arrest. Chicago investment executive taken into federal custody in multi-state fraud investigation." Followed, 30 seconds later, by "Former wife and divorce proceedings cited as origin of forensic audit." She looked at it until it scrolled off the screen. "They're going to say I destroyed him," she said. Tae-jun looked at the television, then back at her. "Some people. The people who knew him, the investors, the foundation donors who wrote checks thinking they were doing something decent." She turned her coffee cup in its saucer. "They're going to need someone to blame besides themselves for not seeing it." "Yes," he said, "they will. And I'm the available candidate. For a while. Maybe longer than a while." He was quiet. "Does that bother you?" she asked. He looked at her directly. "What bothers me is that it has to be a consideration at all," he said. "What he did should be the only story. What you did to expose it should be the secondary story. Whether people decide to be angry at you for it." He paused. "No. It doesn't bother me in the sense of making me want to stop, if that's what you're asking." She wasn't entirely sure what she was asking. She let it sit. The food arrived. She ate the soup first because she was cold in a way that had nothing to do with the diner's temperature. The warmth of it moved through her incrementally, doing the physical work that nothing else had managed to do all day. Across from her, Tae-jun ate his eggs with the mechanical focus of a man refueling rather than dining. He was still thinking. She could see it in the small tension around his eyes, the way he occasionally stopped chewing and then resumed. Whatever he was turning over, he kept it internal. She let him. She was turning things over herself. Patricia, the housekeeper who had slipped a note under her door. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to the number she still had for Patricia from the household management contact list she had kept, without fully knowing why she kept it. "Patricia, this is Zariah Monroe. I know things were difficult at the end. If you're willing to be in touch, I'd like to speak with you when you're ready. No pressure and no obligation. I just wanted to make sure you knew you weren't forgotten." She put the phone face down on the table. Tae-jun watched her do it. "The housekeeper," he said. "She left me a note," Zariah said, "when he had my things moved out of the bedroom. She was the only person in that house who said anything." He nodded slowly. She finished the soup, started on the sandwich. The diner around them went on in its ordinary life. The child at the booth nearby had spilled something, and the father was dealing with it with the weary competence of someone who had dealt with this specific spill many times before. And the 2 men at the counter were arguing good-naturedly about something related to a sports team. And the woman who had seated them was refilling coffee all the way down the counter with the focused rhythm of someone who had done this for decades and still chose to do it well. Zariah watched all of it. She thought about how much of her last 12 years had happened in rooms that looked nothing like this. Rooms that were designed and curated and managed to communicate something about the people who occupied them. Rooms that were more performance than habitation. Foundation galas. Investment dinners. The Lakeside Mansion's formal sitting room where Preston received guests. This room performed nothing. It was just a place where people ate when they needed to eat. She found she was not in a hurry to leave it. They sat there for an hour and 20 minutes. At some point during the second cup of coffee, Tae-jun said, "My attorney called while you were in with Ose. The voluntary statement, given the petition was denied, Garfield can't revisit the conflict allegation without new evidence. Christine recommends we table it indefinitely. Agreed, Zariah said. I wanted you to know I was prepared to make it. I know. She looked at him. I knew that morning in the car. He held her gaze. I also want you to know, she said, that I spent a significant portion of the last 48 hours being angry at you for things that weren't entirely your fault. Some of them were, he said. Some of them, she agreed. The web information. That should have come to me sooner. Yes. And the transfer. The reserve fund. You couldn't have known how it would look. But it looked the way it looked. Yes. She pulled in a breath. Let it out. I'm not interested in maintaining a list. I'm just telling you. Because I think we're past the point where I pretend things didn't happen. Good, he said. I don't want you to pretend things. She looked at him for a moment. The terrible diner light was doing him no favors, and he looked tired in a way that was oddly humanizing, the line of fatigue around his eyes, the fact that his collar was finally fully open and the edge of the tattoo was more visible than it had been in 2 days, dark and intricate against his neck. She had spent 12 years with a man who never looked tired, who managed his appearance as he managed everything else, as presentation, as control. She had not realized until right now, in this diner, that she had absorbed from that a subtle and constant anxiety about what it meant when something showed. Tae-jun's tiredness showed. It didn't mean anything was failing. It just meant he was a person who had been awake for too long and was eating eggs in a diner and sitting across from her without managing it. She looked down at her coffee. After the sentencing, she said, I want to rebuild the foundation. She had not planned to say this now, but it came out clear and certain, the way things do when they've been forming underneath conscious thought for a while. Not the Caldwell Foundation, something new, under my name only. I want to focus it entirely on the Pediatric Surgical Assistance Program. Expand it, make it the central function, rather than one component. And I want to use the Michigan House as a retreat space for families during treatment. Kids who are in long-term care, families who've traveled for procedures, people who need somewhere to be that isn't a hospital waiting room. Tae-jun listened. He did not say it was a good idea or offer to fund it or express admiration. He just listened, and when she stopped, he asked, Does the Michigan House have enough space for that kind of residential use? I'd need to add 2 structures, a medical support wing. Nothing clinical, just accessibility modifications and a nursing station, and a family residence building, maybe 8 units. She paused. It would take time. How long? 18 months, realistically, maybe 2 years. He nodded. The Jeonhan Fund has a construction arm, he said. Non-residential mostly, but I'll need to do it myself, she said. Or at least initiate it myself. You understand why? He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. I understand why. That's not a permanent rule, she said. Just a starting condition. He looked at her carefully, processing the distinction. The difference between not yet and never, which was a significant one, and she could see him receiving it as such. Okay, he said. She paid for the meal. He didn't argue about it. They went back into the cold. The next 6 weeks were the kind that don't consolidate into clean narrative. They were procedural and exhausting and repetitive in the specific way of legal processes, depositions, document reviews, calls with Dana at irregular hours, meetings with Osei's team where Zariah would sit for 3 hours going through transaction records and emerge with a headache that took 2 days to clear. She moved into the Michigan House permanently, not as a refuge but as a choice. She did not want to return to Chicago permanently, not yet. Not while the city still held the texture of the previous 12 years in every street and building and association. Michigan was where she had chosen to be, and she stayed there. Patricia responded to her text on a Thursday morning, 11 days after the arrest. Miss Monroe, thank you for writing. I'm doing okay. I heard what happened. I'm glad. I'll call you when I'm ready, if that's all right. Zariah wrote back, whenever you're ready, no deadline. Patricia called on a Tuesday in January. They talked for 40 minutes. Patricia had taken a position with a family in Evanston. She was doing okay, she said again, which Zariah understood meant she was managing, which was its own kind of okay. She told Zariah that on the morning she had been instructed to clear the master bedroom, she had cried in the laundry room for 20 minutes before she could make herself begin. You didn't have to tell me that, Zariah said. I know, Patricia said, but I wanted you to know someone cried for you that day. Someone in that house. Zariah held the phone and looked out the window at the winter lake for a moment. Thank you, she said. The foundation board, the remaining members who had not been connected to Webb's activities, convened in February for a restructuring meeting. It was not a comfortable meeting. 3 of the board members had known Preston for over a decade and sat through 3 hours of financial disclosure with the expressions of people having a particularly difficult dental procedure. One of them, a retired physician named Hargrove, who had joined the board because he believed in the pediatric surgical mission, asked Zariah directly at the end of the meeting, "Was there a single day in 12 years when any of this work was real?" She thought about it seriously before answering. "The families," she said, "the ones who got the grants, the surgeries that happened, those were real. Preston found something legitimate and built his structure behind it. The thing in front was real. He needed it to be." Hargrove sat with that for a moment. "That's a terrible way to preserve something," he said. "Yes," she said, "it is." Marcus Webb pled guilty in early March. He received 18 months and agreed to full cooperation with the federal investigation in exchange for a sentence reduction. His cooperation produced 3 additional individuals, 2 attorneys and an accountant, who had knowingly participated in the cross-state capital movement structure. Celeste Vaughn accepted a plea agreement in mid-March. 18 months suspended sentence, 400 hours community service, full restitution of the value of charitable funds spent on personal expenditures traceable to her, which included, specifically, the diamond bracelet. Zariah's attorney confirmed the agreement to her by text. She did not feel satisfied by it. She did not feel much about Celeste specifically. What she felt was the specific tiredness of someone who has carried a weight for a long time and set it down and now must decide what to do with the hands that were holding it. Preston's case took longer. Federal cases always did. She had known it would. She had prepared herself for a year of process, possibly longer. What she had not fully prepared for was how present he would remain in her daily life during that time. Not physically, not even through direct contact, but through the ongoing procedural machinery of the case. His attorney's filings, Osei's requests for additional documentation, the deposition she gave in April that lasted 7 hours and covered 12 years of financial decisions she had made without understanding their full context. She came home from the deposition to the Michigan house and sat on the porch in the cold evening air and did not move for 40 minutes. Tae-jun was there. He had driven up that afternoon. He had been dividing his time since January, spending 3 or 4 days a week in Michigan, returning to Chicago for whatever required his physical presence in the city. He had not moved into the house. He stayed in a separate residence 15 minutes down the road, which had been his suggestion, which she had accepted with a gratitude she didn't fully articulate. He came out to the porch and sat in the chair beside her. He did not ask how the deposition went. He knew how depositions went. After a while, she said, "He told his attorneys to challenge every document I identified as evidence of credential misuse. He's going to make me prove, item by item, that I didn't authorize those transactions knowingly." "They'll lose that argument," Tae-jun said. "Eventually. It's going to take a while." "Yes. He's going to make this as long and as costly as he can," she said. "Not because he thinks he'll win, because it's the only damage he has left to do." Tae-jun looked at the lake. It was dark, the late April dark that still held winter's edge. "Then you'll outlast it," he said, "because you've already outrun everything else he tried." She looked at him. He was not looking at her when he said it. He was looking at the water. His profile was the same profile it had always been, familiar in the way of things you have carried in your memory for a long time without realizing how precisely you kept them. "You know what the hardest part of the deposition was?" she said. He turned to look at her. "They asked me whether I ever suspected anything, at any point, in 12 years. She held his gaze. And I had to answer honestly. What was the honest answer? That I suspected something was wrong 2 years before I found the line item, she said. Not this specifically, not fraud, just wrongness. A sense that things didn't add up. And I didn't pull the thread because I wasn't ready to know what was on the other end of it. Tae-jun was quiet. I told them that, she said, under oath, that I suspected something was wrong and I chose not to investigate it for approximately 2 years. That's not... It's true, she said. I know it doesn't make me legally complicit. Dana was very clear on that, but it's true. And I had to say it out loud, in a room, to people writing down everything I said. And now it exists on a transcript. He looked at her steadily. That took more courage than anything else you've done in this case, he said. She shook her head slightly. It was just honesty, she said. I know, he said. That's what I mean. They sat on the porch in the April cold until the temperature drove them inside. She made tea. He sat at the kitchen table while she stood at the stove, and they talked about nothing specific for a while. The construction timeline for the family residence building, which had progressed from concept to site assessment, the permit process. A contractor she'd been recommended by a woman on the County Historical Preservation Board who had overseen restoration work on properties similar to the estate. It was ordinary conversation. She had not had much ordinary conversation in the preceding months. She sat down across from him with her tea and thought about how strange it was that ordinary felt like something she had to relearn. The specific muscle memory of talking without strategy, without management, without the constant background calculation of whether what she was saying was being registered and used. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. The 4 years, she said, when you were watching Preston, not intervening, were there moments when you almost... Several, he said, without hesitation, without softening it. What stopped you? He looked at his hands on the table, then up at her. You, he said. You were the reason not to. Not because I thought you couldn't handle what was happening, because you had the right to handle it yourself. And I knew if I moved, if I did what I was capable of doing, you would have the outcome without the agency, and I didn't want that for you. She considered that. Even when it was bad, she said, even when the bedroom, Patricia's note, the things that happened that you must have known about. Especially then, he said. His voice was low and even. Especially then, because every time I was most tempted was when the intervention would have been most about what I wanted and least about what you needed. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about 12 years of a man who made every decision about what he wanted while calling it what she needed. She thought about 4 years of a different man, sitting at a careful distance, holding everything he was capable of, waiting. That was very difficult, she said. What you did or didn't do. Yes, he said simply. It was. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. Just that. His hand turned under hers and held on. They stayed like that for a while. Preston entered a guilty plea in September, 14 months after the divorce was finalized. 22 months in federal prison. Full restitution to all charitable funds determined to have been misappropriated. Permanent removal from the Caldwell Foundation's board. A prohibition on serving as a director or officer of any charitable organization. Surrender of his stake in 3 investment holdings that had been used as vehicles in the capital movement scheme. Zariah attended the sentencing hearing. She had debated whether to go. Dana had told her she did not have to. Osei's team did not require her presence. Tae-jun had said nothing either way, which was the right thing to say. She went because she had built 11 months of work toward this moment, and she was not going to let someone else occupy the room while it happened. She sat in the gallery, not at the council table. Dana was there. Christine Yoon. Renata Osei in the row ahead. Preston walked in looking reduced. Not in the dramatic way of film. He was not visibly broken, not visibly contrite. He was simply smaller. The executive architecture was still there. The posture, the suit, the controlled face. But it was the architecture of a building with nothing inside it. The scaffolding without the structure. He saw her when he sat down. He did not look away. Neither did she. The proceedings lasted 2 hours. She had the opportunity to make a victim impact statement, and she had written one, and she stood at the podium and read it. She talked about the surgical fund families, the ones who had applied because they had exhausted every other option, who had trusted that the money they'd been promised was real, who would have had their situations altered dramatically if the $2 million transfer had completed. She talked about them specifically, not abstractly, because she had spent months learning their applications, their children's diagnoses, their travel distances and financial situations, and she was not going to let them be a statistic in a courtroom. She talked about the employees, the accountants who signed off on expense reports under pressure, the estate staff who followed instructions they couldn't afford to refuse, the people whose complicity was often their vulnerability and not their character. She talked about the foundation's original purpose, the thing it had been before it became camouflage, and what she intended to do with it going forward. She did not talk about herself. She had said what she needed to say about herself under oath in April. When she finished, she gathered her pages and stepped down from the podium and walked back to the gallery and sat down. Preston did not speak. His attorney had advised against an allocution, and for once Preston had taken advice. The judge issued the sentence: 22 months. When the gavel came down, Zariah looked at the ceiling for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked straight ahead. The room began to shift and reorganize. Attorneys closing folders, clerks gathering documents. The slow dispersal of a proceeding concluded. She watched Preston be led to a side door by a federal marshal. He walked without looking back. At the door, he stopped. She did not know why. Perhaps his body simply paused, the way bodies do in thresholds. He turned. He looked across the room at her. She looked back. She was very still. Her hands were in her lap. Her face was not performing anything. Not satisfaction, not triumph, not grief. Just her face, looking at him, across the distance of a courtroom, after 22 months and 12 years and one very cold morning in a conference room on the 31st floor. He opened his mouth. He did not say anything. Then the marshal's hand was at his elbow, and he was through the door, and it closed, and Preston Caldwell was gone from her line of sight. She sat in the gallery for another full minute. Then she stood, gathered her coat, and walked out. The reconstruction of the estate took 21 months. She hired a project manager named Solange, who had 15 years of institutional building experience and who ran the construction process with the focused pragmatism of someone who had no patience for delays but genuine respect for the work itself. 2 new structures went up on the property's north side. The family residence building, 8 units each with accessibility modifications, and a small private kitchen, and a support wing that housed a nursing station, a physical therapy room, a shared common space. The main house was left largely as it was, its bones preserved, its rooms opened up to become gathering spaces. Zariah named it the Evelyn Monroe Family Care Center. She did not hold a gala for the opening. She held an afternoon for the first 12 families who had been enrolled in the Pediatric Surgical Assistance Program, people who were in treatment, who were traveling, who needed somewhere to be. She arranged transportation. She stocked the kitchens. She put fresh flowers in every room because her mother had always believed that living spaces should acknowledge that life was happening in them. The day the first families arrived was a Thursday in October, overcast and with the specific cold that means the season has changed and will not change back. Zariah stood on the porch and watched a van pull up the gravel drive. A family got out, a man and a woman who looked exhausted in the structural way, and 2 children, one of whom was about 8 and moving carefully, and the other who was perhaps 4 and ran immediately toward the lake before the father caught up with her. The mother stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. She looked up at Zariah. She said, "Is this real?" Zariah said, "It's real." The woman stood there for a moment with her hands at her sides, and something moved across her face that Zariah recognized. The specific expression of someone who has been carrying something at maximum effort for so long that the offer of a place to set it down produces not immediate relief, but first a kind of disorientation, the body not yet trusting that the weight is actually allowed to go. "Come in," Zariah said. "Your rooms are ready." She held the door. They came in. Tae-jun was in the kitchen. He had driven up the day before and had spent the morning doing the specific kind of work that is invisible when it's done well, checking that the heating was calibrated properly in the family units, that the van transportation was coordinated, that the kitchen stocks were complete. He was not doing it as a statement. He was doing it because things needed doing. He looked up when Zariah came in. She looked at him. He read something in her face and nodded, once, with a specific understanding that required no elaboration. Through the kitchen window, the lake was the particular flat silver of October, and the trees at the property's edge had gone the color of old copper, and the small girl who had run toward the water was now standing at the shoreline with her father's hand in hers, looking out, saying something Zariah couldn't hear through the glass. The house began to fill. 3 more families arrived by noon, a grandmother traveling with her teenage grandson, a single father with twin boys, one of whom was in a wheelchair, a couple who had driven 9 hours and who accepted the offered food without sitting down first, eating standing in the kitchen with the hunger of people who had not prioritized their own meals in a very long time. Zariah moved through all of it. She was not performing the role of benevolent founder. She was doing the ordinary work of a person responsible for a space where other people were trying to get through something hard, refilling the coffee, explaining where the laundry was, sitting for 20 minutes with the grandmother who wanted to talk about her grandson's prognosis, and needed someone to listen who wasn't going to offer optimism as a performance. Late afternoon, the light dropping toward the lake. She was in the main house's common room when her phone buzzed with a delivery notification from a courier service. She had not ordered anything. She went to the door. A small package, wooden box sealed with wax. Her name on it. No return address. She brought it inside and opened it at the kitchen table. Inside, packed carefully in tissue paper, was a key. Old-fashioned, silver, the kind made for a specific lock and a specific door. And underneath it, a folded note in Tae-jun's handwriting. The estate manager found these during the restoration of the north storage room. Your mother's. I thought they should come home. She unfolded the note further. A second sheet in a different hand, older, the pen pressed firmly. The writing, the particular style of a woman who learned cursive in an era when it was taught as a discipline. Her mother's handwriting. A letter. Dated 12 years ago. She recognized the date. It was 2 months before her mother's death. She sat down. She read it. It was not addressed to anyone specifically. It read like something written in private, a woman thinking on paper, about the estate, about what she hoped it would become, about Zariah, about the specific kind of strength she believed her daughter had, even when her daughter couldn't see it herself. The letter was not dramatic. It was not a farewell, and it was not a prophecy. It was a woman writing honestly about a person she loved, in the specific language of someone who knows they might not have much more time and wants to make sure the thought exists somewhere outside their own head. She will know what to do, her mother had written near the end of the letter. She has always known. She just needs the room to do it. Zariah set the letter down on the table. She pressed her palm flat against the wood. Through the kitchen window, the lake, the trees, the thin October light. From the rest of the house, the low sounds of people settling into space, voices, a child's laughter from somewhere in the family wing. She sat there for a long time. Tae-jun came in from the porch. I was carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He had made it without asking, the way he had begun doing things in this house without making them a statement or an offering, just doing them because they needed doing. He set one in front of her and looked at the letter on the table and at her face. He sat down across from her. He did not read the letter. He waited. She knew, Zariah said finally. He waited. My mother. She wrote this 2 months before she died. She touched the edge of the letter. She knew what I could do. She knew before I did. Yes, Tae-jun said. I think she probably did. Zariah looked at the letter for another moment. Then she carefully folded it and put it back in the wooden box with the key. She picked up the coffee, held it, felt the warmth of it in her hands. When Preston is released, she said, there may be things he tries. His name still exists. There are people who knew him who will want to help him reestablish. Yes, Tae-jun said. I'm not going to spend energy on that, she said. He looked at her. I mean it, she said. I'm finished thinking about what Preston will or won't do. If he does something that requires a legal response, Dana will handle it. Otherwise, she set the coffee down. He doesn't live in my head anymore. Tae-jun nodded slowly. She looked at him across the kitchen table. This kitchen, her mother's kitchen, which had become the center of something neither of them could have described 2 years ago. Something that had been built out of the wreckage of one thing and the careful, patient tending of another. There's a letter in my bag, she said. It arrived last week. I haven't opened it. He waited. Preston's return address. She held his gaze. He wants a final meeting. Closure is the word he used. Tae-jun's face did not change. What are you going to do? He said. She looked at the wooden box on the table, at her mother's letter inside it. She thought about what closure meant to Preston. The last word, the last framing, one final chance to be the author of the story even after the story had ended without him. She thought about the courthouse corridor and his voice saying her name in the way she had not turned around. She already had the closure she needed. It had not come from him. It had come from standing in a room full of families and watching a 4-year-old run toward a lake and asking someone if it was real. She stood up from the table. She went to the coat rack by the door and took the letter from her bag's outer pocket. Brought it back to the kitchen, set it on the counter. She opened the drawer beside the stove, her mother's drawer, the one that had always held everything slightly miscellaneous, and found a box of matches. She lit one. She held the corner of the letter to the flame. She held it over the sink while it caught and burned, the paper curling inward on itself, going orange and then dark, the edges losing their form, the words, whatever they were, releasing themselves into smoke and into the draft that came from the window above the sink. When it was gone, she ran the tap, watched the ash clear. She turned off the tap. She went back to the table and picked up her coffee and sat down. Tae-jun was watching her. He did not say anything for a moment. Then, "Good." She almost smiled. It started in her chest and moved to her face, and when it arrived, it was not the managed expression she had deployed for 12 years of dinners and galas and press photographs. It was just a smile, small and genuine and a little tired around the edges. "You said you had something to tell me," she said. "In the courthouse corridor." Dana interrupted. He looked at her. "I told you the other part," he said. "In the diner." "You told me you loved me before any of this," she said. "Before you could be useful." "Yes." "That's only half of it," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I love you now too," he said. "After all of it. With the case and the depositions and the construction and the bad diner lighting. After all of it." She held his gaze. She thought about what it meant to be known by someone who had stayed far enough away to let her be herself and close enough to be present when she needed presence. The specific discipline of that, the specific cost. She thought about her mother's letter. She will know what to do. She just needs the room to do it. She had the room now. This house. This kitchen. These families in the rooms above and around her getting through something hard. The lake outside the window. The work ahead. The permits for next year's expansion. The grant framework she was rebuilding from the foundation's restored infrastructure. The program director she was interviewing next week. The dozen ordinary demanding tasks of a person who has chosen to build something. She had built it. Out of what he did to her and what she did with what he gave her and what she had always known how to do even when she forgot it. She picked up the wooden box and held it in her lap. "I'm not ready to say it back yet," she said. "Not with apology. Not with distance. Just honesty. The plain, clean kind she had decided to operate in." "I know," he said. "But I'm close," she said. "And I wanted you to know that." He nodded. He reached across the table. She took his hand. Outside, the lake held the last of the light. In the family wing, someone was running a bath. And from the common room came the sound of the television, low, and two voices talking over it. The grandmother's voice, patient and unhurried, and her grandson's, lower, answering something. The house breathed around them. Zariah Monroe sat in her mother's kitchen with her hand in the hand of a man who had waited 4 years to be allowed to hold it, and she looked out at the lake that her mother had refused to sell and that her ex-husband had tried to take and that she had refused to surrender, and she felt, with the particular certainty of someone who has been through the full cost of a thing, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not rescued, not restored to something prior, just here, built new from the materials available, choosing. Later, when the families had settled for the evening and the house was quieter, she went out to the porch alone. The night was cold and clear. The lake was dark and moving. The stars above the tree line were the kind that only appear fully when you're far enough from the city to see them. Dense and matter-of-fact, the sky doing what it does regardless of what's happening below it. She stood on the porch her mother had stood on. She put her hands in her coat pockets. She had not cried through any of it. Not the signing, not the arrest, not the sentencing, not the deposition. She had come close, in moments. But the tears had never fully arrived, held back by the ongoing work, the next thing that needed doing, the particular discipline of a person who has decided that feeling everything will wait until it's safe to feel everything. Standing on the porch in the October dark, she let it arrive. Not grief. Not quite. Something more complex. The specific emotion that has no single name, that lives at the intersection of loss and relief and exhaustion and something cautiously close to hope. The emotion of a person who has survived something that cost them enormously and is only now, in the quiet after the cost, beginning to understand what they survived and what they still have. She stood there until the cold required her to go in. Then she went in. She poured herself a glass of water from the kitchen tap and stood at the window and looked at the dark lake for a few more minutes. Then she put the glass in the sink and turned off the kitchen light and walked through the quiet house toward her room. At the bottom of the stairs, she stopped. Above her, through the ceiling, she could hear the faint sounds of families in rooms. Someone settling, a child's voice, briefly, then quiet. The small sounds of people alive in a space built to hold them. She put her hand on the banister. She felt the wood under her palm. Old wood, her mother's house, solid and real. She went upstairs. Outside, across the dark water, no lights were visible on the far shore. Just the lake, and the sky and the snow that had begun to fall, lightly, without announcement. The first snow of the season, coming down on the water and the trees and the roof of the house in small, soft increments, accumulating without drama, the way the most permanent changes always do.